Chapter 1. His eyelashes fluttered a few times, and his eyes suddenly opened. Li Yi woke up from his nightmare. The first thing he did after sitting up in bed was to look down at his body. His arms were still there, his legs were still there, everything that should be there. Fortunately, there were no missing parts. After checking up and down, and even glancing at his crotch a few times, Li Yi let out a long sigh of relief. Who knew that the fire protection system of such a large provincial library was actually so bad? The 37 or 38 degree weather couldn't stay at home at all. Li Yi just wanted to go to the library to get some air conditioning and read for a while to improve his image. He didn't expect to fall asleep while reading. When he couldn't stand the heat and woke up, there was no one beside him. Wherever his eyes could see, there were flames. The fire had even spread to the bookshelf next to him. If he hadn't woken up by the heat at the critical moment, tomorrow's headline news might have been XX Province Library accidentally caught fire. A male reader was buried in the fire while taking a nap. Li Yi, who reacted, of course, immediately escaped. However, when he got up and ran to the fire escape, a huge bookshelf next to him fell. After his vision went black, Li Yi lost consciousness. In such a situation, he actually didn't die, and there were no injuries on his body. Li Yi silently gave 100 thumbs up to the firefighter in his heart. So this should be a hospital? I don't know which hospital it is. The bedboard is so hard. It's uncomfortable to lie on it. There is also a faint musty smell in the air. I don't know how long the sheets haven't been washed. Li Yi decided to give this hospital a bad review after leaving the hospital. The user experience is too bad. He looked around. There was a simple bed made of 2 wooden planks, a shabby short table, and a few tattered thread-bound books on the table. There was not even a television. This hospital was really shabby. Wait a minute. What's that at the corner of the table? An oil lamp? How is this hospital? F***CK. Is this a hospital? Li Yi, who had just woken up, was still a little slow. Only now did he realize that this place didn't look like a hospital at all. In any case, he was also a patient. How could he treat a patient like this? Li Yi felt an inexplicable anger in his heart. He jumped out of the bed and ran out barefoot, without even putting on his shoes. A moment later, Li Yi stood beside the crystal-clear stream that flowed past his door with a dumbfounded expression. The stream water was very clear, and the young man's shadow was reflected in the water, scaring away the fish that had been playing here. The young man in the water had sword-like eyebrows and starry eyes. He was handsome, and had fair skin. He wore a moon-white scholarly robe, and his hair was tied up in a high bun. He was an elegant and beautiful young man. Who knew how many young girls would fall in love with him? Even Li Yi had to admit that this guy was simply too good-looking. Li Yi stood there for half an hour, and felt that he was about to be bent. But the problem was that he didn't know this peerlessly beautiful man. That wasn't the most serious thing. What was more serious was that this guy was clearly his own shadow. Li Yi patted his own face, and the young man in the water also patted his own face. Li Yi frowned, and the young man in the water also frowned. Li Yi was dumbfounded, and the young man in the water also looked like he had **ket a husky. Haha, I know, this is a dream. I must be dreaming. Li Yi laughed and slapped his own face hard. The burning pain almost made his tears flow out. A white-haired old man walked past Li Yi with his hands behind his back. He looked at Li Yi, who was slapping himself and laughing at the same time in shock. The expression on his face was rather horrified. Has this boy from the Li family become stupid from studying? Has he lost his mind? Li Yi didn't have time to pay attention to the old man who walked past him. In fact, he was still in a state of extreme shock, and didn't see the old man. He tried to slap himself a few times, but he didn't wake up from his dream. Li Yi finally collapsed on the riverside with his legs weak. Not long after, Li Yi sat by the riverside with one hand holding his chin. His eyes were blank as he stared blankly at the water. At this moment, he was very much like a philosopher. Who am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going? Complex and profound questions began to appear in his mind one by one. When he was about to think about survival or destruction, Li Yi finally woke up. He came from the 21st century and had read countless novels and TV dramas. After calming down and thinking for a while, he already had a guess in his heart that even he didn't dare to believe. However, before that, he had to confirm it first. He looked down at the reflection in the water again. He didn't see the face that he had seen for more than 20 years. Lee had an indescribable strange feeling. "Bah, pretty boy." He looked at the young man in the water with disdain, and spat fiercely into the water. When the old man behind Lee saw this, the expression on his face became even more horrified. He had lived for decades, but this was the first time that the old man saw a person laughing while slapping himself, and then spitting at his reflection in the water. Could it be that this Lee brat has really gone mad? Lee, who was about to find someone to ask about the situation, turned his head and saw an old man with white hair and beard standing on the path behind him, looking at him with a very horrified expression. When Lee saw this, he was delighted. He finally saw a living person. He put on a smile that he thought was very kind, and slowly walked to the old man's side. He asked, "Sir, may I know what year it is now and where is this place?" When Lee spoke, the old man's expression changed again. It's over. It seems that the boy from the Lee family has really gone crazy. He doesn't even recognize himself. And what he's saying is even more nonsense. The old man has no idea what he's talking about. When Lee saw the expression on the old man's face, he thought that the old man didn't hear him clearly. After all, it was normal for the old man to be deaf. Just as he was about to speak, he seemed to have thought of something. After thinking for a while, he opened his mouth again and asked, "May I ask this old man, what year and month is it now, and where is this place?" This time, the old man finally understood what Lee was saying. He let out a long sigh, and the expression on his face was extremely regretful. He really didn't expect that such a quick-witted boy, who was also extremely handsome, would actually study so much that he became stupid. He could actually forget these things. He originally thought that if he was successful in his studies in the future, he might be able to bring glory to his family, and the Lee family village would also be honored. Then he would marry his unmarried granddaughter to him, but now, sigh God, what kind of sin had he committed? Seeing two strong men carrying hoes walking over from afar, the old man hurriedly waved at them and shouted, "Dezhuang, you two brothers, come over quickly. This boy from the Lee family has probably lost his mind. Don't let him run around, quickly catch him." Chapter 2. Looking at the boy from the Lee family who was staring at him with a blank expression, the old man took a few steps back and became even more vigilant. He had seen this expression on Widow Lu's face before. He recalled that Widow Lu at the east end of the village had the same expression a few days ago. When she woke up, she didn't know who she was. She sat in the courtyard all day and giggled foolishly. Once someone approached her, she would immediately scream and scratch and bite them later. The officials came and said that Widow Lu had lost her mind. They took an iron chain and locked her in the house. They also warned the villagers to take good care of her. If she ran out and hurt someone, they would have to bear the responsibility. Lee saw the old man's expression change in a second. He turned his head and saw two strong men jogging toward him. After a short moment of shock, Lee didn't hesitate to run. What a joke! He had clearly heard the old man say that he had lost his mind or something. If he was caught, he might be treated as an evil spirit, tied to a pillar and burned with fire or something like that. Lee, who had already died once, treasured his life more than anyone else. At this moment, he was undoubtedly running at the fastest speed he had ever run in his life. Behind him, the old man and the two strong men were dumbfounded as they watched Lee run away. They were so shocked that their jaws almost dropped to the ground. No one had expected that the boy from the Lee family, who was so weak that he had to rest for a long time after taking 2 steps, could actually run so fast. It seems that a person who has lost his mind really can't be judged by common sense. The old man stroked his long beard and couldn't help but sigh, worried that he would be caught by the two strong men and burned to death as a lunatic. Lee ran all the way until he couldn't see the village anymore. When there was no one chasing after him at the end of his sight, he sat on the ground. Panting heavily, he felt as if his entire body was about to collapse. After running at full speed for so long, he had almost exhausted all his strength. If the two strong men were to catch up to him now, Lee wouldn't even have the strength to stand up and escape. There was no need to confirm anything. Li was almost certain that he had caught up with the wave of transmigration. Although he didn't know what year and place he was in, it was better than being burned to death under the bookshelf. At least he was still alive. After sitting on the ground and recovering a little of his physical strength, Li was worried again. There was no way he could go back to that house. There were only 4 walls, a table, a bed, and nothing to eat. Perhaps when he returned, the whole village would welcome him at the entrance of the village with torches. Then he could die a glorious death. The only difference was where he would be burned. But if he did not go back, where would he sleep at night? Li, who had just arrived in this world, had to first solve the problem of survival. Rumble. At this moment, Li suddenly felt the ground beneath his feet shake. What's wrong? An earthquake? Li's heart was filled with grief. He was almost burned to death as soon as he arrived, and now he encountered an earthquake. What kind of sin did he commit in his previous life? But very soon, Li discovered that it was not an earthquake. At the end of his field of vision, a torrent of smoke and dust was rolling towards him. Under Li's horrified gaze, it stopped a few steps in front of him. Cough! Cough! Li was caught off guard. He breathed in a mouthful of PM2.5 and choked to the point that tears flowed out. With great difficulty, he regained his senses. Just as he was about to scold someone for being so uncultured, he raised his head and couldn't help but be startled. On a tall horse, a beautiful woman dressed in white was looking down at him. Her brows, which were like mountains in the distance, were slightly furrowed, as if she was thinking about something. Looking at that incomparably delicate face, Li felt his throat go dry. Before he could speak, he saw that the woman nodded slightly, a satisfied expression on her face. She glanced at him indifferently and waved her hand. Tie him up. Under Li's dazed gaze, the ferocious bandits behind the woman dismounted and surged forward. It's a scholar. He's quite handsome, worthy of our master. If I had to say, second miss has good taste. All of you shut up. Li's hands were tied behind his back as he lay on the horse's back. In his previous life, he had gotten dizzy from public transportation. So he clearly hadn't adapted to this era's transportation. He was dizzy from the swaying along the way, and his consciousness gradually blurred. From time to time, he could hear a man's rough laughter. His voice sounded like a broken gong, and then he faintly heard a shout. Those voices were gone, and Li completely lost consciousness. When he woke up again, the first thing he saw was a pink gauze curtain. Li got up from the bed with a grunt and looked around vigilantly. A carved bed frame, a quilt that emitted a faint fragrance, and a pink gauze curtain filled with the heart of a girl. There were some simple wooden furniture, tables, chairs, and cabinets. Bandits. Some remnant fragments in his mind caused Li's expression to change. He turned his head to look around, and only when he found that there was no one else in the room did he feel slightly relieved. Could it be that he was dreaming? Li suddenly thought that he was lucky. In the next moment, Li realized that he was dreaming if he had such a thought, because it hurt. Li's expression was twisted as he clutched his lower abdomen. The burning pain coming from under his clothes made him involuntarily suck in air. Li cursed in his heart. Those boorish fellows. He didn't even need to think to know that this was definitely caused by lying on the horse's back. It was unknown who had invented this kind of clothing. There were layers upon layers, and it took Li a long time to undo them. When he looked down, there was indeed a red patch above his lower abdomen. At this time, Li didn't have the mood to scold those bandits. He had to face his current situation. It seemed that he had been captured by those bandits somewhere. When he was lying on the horse's back, he faintly heard those people saying words like chief and marriage. After Li's imagination ran wild, the expression on his face suddenly became very frightened. Marriage. When he looked down again, Li realized that he was no longer wearing the clothes he had worn in the morning. He didn't know when he had changed into a bright red robe, and there was a bright red flower in front of his chest. He looked very festive, if he counted the one on his head with pheasant feathers, peacock feathers. Anyway, he didn't know what kind of feathers it was, but it was definitely the style of a groom in an ancient TV drama. In his remaining consciousness, it seemed that he had been supported by someone somewhere, and had knelt and kowtowed. After those fragmented images flashed in his mind, Li Yi's face turned deathly pale. He had actually been taken back to be the wife of the chief? No, it was the husband of the chief. Chapter 3. Before he transmigrated, the world that Li Yi lived in was a time when the element of transmigration was very popular. Regardless of whether it was novels or movies, they all scrambled to incorporate this element into their works. It was so popular that everyone from 8-year-olds to 80-year-olds knew what transmigration meant. In the past, Li Yi had also thought that if he had transmigrated one day, he would definitely be born into a family of officials, if he was in a peaceful era. If he had nothing better to do, he would bring a few lackeys to the streets to flirt with innocent women. If he was in a chaotic era, he would rise up, occupy a mountain and declare himself king. When he was in the mood, he would bring a group of lackeys down the mountain to kidnap a few wives. Reality proved that one had to pay for what they had done. Li Yi had only fantasized about it for a while, and this kind of thing had really happened to him. What made Li Yi even more terrified was that if he did not hear wrongly, those people said that the person who was going to marry was their master. Li Yi's lips turned pale as he thought of a certain terrifying possibility. Could it be that the fort master actually liked men? Li Yi had long heard that homosexuality, especially male homosexuality, was very popular in ancient times. They even called it the pleasure of the male sex. To Li Yi, who would rather die than be gay, this was one of the most difficult things to accept. Li Yi's heart turned cold. He felt around and realized that there was no discomfort in a certain part of his body. He could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. Fortunately, his chastity was still there. Li Yi carefully looked at his attire. He was stunned for a moment before he fell into deep thought. He was obviously wearing the clothes of a groom. Could it be that the master was a little submissive? If it was a little submissive, then he could accept it. But not even a little submissive. He was the most straight man he could be, a straight man. As a real man, he naturally had to be indomitable, and would not bend even after 100 twists and turns. Just as Li Yi was lost in his thoughts, the wooden door of the room made a soft creaking sound before it was gently closed. To Li Yi, the voice sounded like it came from hell. His entire body shrank into the wooden bed. He did not even dare to lift his head to take a look. What he was most worried about was that when he raised his head, he would see a burly, fierce-looking man with exposed chest hair saying to him shyly, "Husband, let's consummate our marriage quickly." That's disgusting. Li Yi could not help but shiver, and did not dare to think further. The footsteps were light, and they were getting closer. Li Yi could already smell a faint fragrance. The fragrance was very familiar, as it was the same as the smell on the bedding. Forget it, the worst that can happen is death. If he was facing a vicious mountain bandit, Li Yi might be very happy to hear this. But when the words, "You can rest assured that I won't hurt you," came out of the mouth of a weak woman, Li Yi couldn't help but feel a sense of humiliation. For a man, how could he endure this? Forget it. Humiliation was humiliation. It was better than seeing those mountain bandits again. If it was some kind of harm, Li Yi could still accept it. During this period of time, you can stay in the stronghold without worry. If you want to study, just let me know, and I will send someone to get it for you. The woman looked at Li Yi and said faintly, "From now on, in front of outsiders, you and I will address each other as husband and wife. You can go to the surroundings of the stronghold. After a period of time, when the time is right, I will naturally let you go." Phew! Address each other as husband and wife? Li Yi stood there in a daze. Only now did he realize that he seemed to have been mistaken about one thing all this time. Could it be that the stronghold master, that those people had mentioned, was this peerless beauty in front of him? In that instant, the image of the burly man in Li Yi's mind gradually became blurry, and was replaced by an incomparably beautiful face. The slim and graceful woman bowed at him and said softly, "Husband, your servant greets you." Bam, bam, bam. Don't let your imagination run wild. This is just the sound of someone knocking on the door. The sudden sound pulled Li Yi back to reality from his fantasy. Then, he saw the wooden door latch break, as if it had been hit by something. A woman with a bucket-like waist, and a young man in his early 20s barged in. "Rui, who is he?" Seeing Li Yi sitting on the bed with his clothes half undone, the man's expression changed abruptly, and he blurted out. Chapter 4. Looking at the young man pointing at him with a bitter and hateful expression, as if he had plucked a peach from his house, Li Yi felt very depressed. Brother, do we know each other? Does he have to put on such an expression as soon as we meet? It's as if I've plucked a peach that he's been eyeing for a long time. We're not familiar. The beautiful woman ignored the young man and looked at the woman with a waist as thick as a water bucket. She turned to Li Yi and said, Husband, let me introduce you. This is second aunt. Husband. Hearing the beautiful woman's words, the young man's expression suddenly changed. He looked at Li Yi with a cold gaze. Seeing his eyes, Li Yi couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. Rui, you can't. The young man was about to speak, but he saw the woman called Rui's pretty face turn cold. She slammed her palm on the high mahogany table beside her. What? Do I have to report to you what I do? Bang! Under Li Yi's horrified gaze, the sturdy-looking wooden table instantly shattered into pieces and became a pile of debris on the ground. The teacups, bowls, and other porcelain on the table were also smashed into pieces. Seeing this scene, Li Yi's expression gradually became sluggish. His outlook on life, the world, and values were all toppled. At this moment, there was only one thought in his mind. Is this King martial arts drama? Thinking about how he had wanted to subdue this woman and escape, Li Yi couldn't help but shiver. He silently moved towards the end of the bed. Li Yi wasn't the only one who shivered like him. The woman with a very strong figure also shivered. Rui, you? Her face was pale as she pointed at the woman who had just smashed the table and was standing there as if nothing had happened. She was originally going to reprimand her, but now she was tongue-tied and couldn't say anything. What advice does second aunt have for me? The woman casually clapped her hands, looked at her, and said indifferently, You are a girl. How can you do such a thing, such a disgrace? The middle-aged woman's face turned red. Halfway through her words, she saw the girl raise her hand again. She couldn't help but shiver, and hurriedly pulled the young man out of the room. A palm that could even shatter a wooden table, if it landed on her. Wouldn't it take her life? The sound of hurried footsteps could no longer be heard, and the room instantly became quiet. I still don't know my husband's name? Li Yi. Li Yi took a deep breath and said. After a while, the pleasant but emotionless voice once again reached Li Yi's ears. It's getting late. Husband, go to bed early. The light footsteps gradually faded away. After hearing the sound of the door closing, Li Yi looked up and saw a faint shadow standing outside the door for a few seconds before a voice could be heard. I am Lu Rui. After the woman left, other than some unknown insect chirping, there was no other sound in the room. Li Yi stared blankly at the simple roof. After a long time, he let out a long sigh and lay straight on the bed, but his eyes didn't close. Although he was very tired now, Li Yi wasn't so careless that he would fall asleep after experiencing so many things: the library fire, the unimaginable transmigration, almost being caught and burned to death by an old man he didn't know, luckily escaping, and then being captured by bandits to become the husband of the stronghold. Who knew what would happen tomorrow? Li Yi felt that if his experiences could be written into a book, it would definitely be very popular. However, he wouldn't dare to write it now even if he had 10 guts. If others found out that he had such strange and dazzling ideas in his head, they definitely wouldn't praise him for having a great imagination. They might even grill him over a fire. Forget it. I don't want to think about this anymore, it's tiring. The most important thing now was to figure out what dynasty he was in and where he was in before making other plans. His mind was empty, without any memories of these things. As for this gigolo who didn't leave anything to him other than this body, Li Yi was very resentful. However, no matter what, a transmigrator should have the halo of a protagonist on his head, right? His brain was filled with so much knowledge that was hundreds and thousands of years ahead of this world. With his intelligence and wisdom, would he be afraid of not doing well? Even if he didn't become a marquis or minister, it would still be easy to become a high-ranking official, right? When that time came, he would be able to lead a few lackeys and tease innocent women on the streets when he was free. He would be able to live an incomparably free and easy life. After lowering his head and thinking for a moment, Li Yi's eyes became a little moist. Imperial examinations? He was an engineering student. He didn't know how to write the 8-legged essay, and he didn't know how to memorize the 4 books and 5 classics. His major wasn't suitable, so he definitely wouldn't be able to pass the imperial examinations. Making gunpowder? Although in the future, the formula for gunpowder could be easily found on the internet, who the hell would bother to do that? Relying on advanced scientific knowledge? Astronomy, geography, bioengineering. Even if Li Yi was very clear about these things, he couldn't explain them. Before he transmigrated, he still couldn't convince his mother to change her mind about letting him go on a blind date immediately, let alone trying to change the ancient people. The possibility of him being turned into barbecued meat would be higher. Li Yi sadly realized that he couldn't change anything, and he didn't dare to change anything. Just in the morning, he was still worried about what to eat in the future. There wasn't even a grain of rice in his house. He was really poor. Li Yi even suspected that the original owner of this body was starved to death. Perhaps because he wasn't in the mood, he didn't feel hungry at the moment, but he still had to face the problem of food shortage. Looking up at the broken roof, Li Yi let out a long sigh. It was fine if he didn't transmigrate to a rich family. At least he didn't have to worry about food and clothing. But now, he couldn't go back to the village, and even the place to live. Li suddenly jumped up from the bed. Place to live? Wasn't this place now? Although it was a little shabby, it was much better than his previous house. Food? What a joke. Was there a need to worry about this? Would bandits lack food? Since that beauty still needed his help, he naturally wouldn't starve to death. Wife? He didn't have to be forced by his mother to go on a blind date. He didn't have to buy a house or a car. Although he was visiting, his wife in name was not even comparable to those superstars in the future. Thinking about it this way, being the husband of a bandit, it didn't seem like a bad thing. He didn't have to work like a dog every day. And when he got home, he had to count how many years it would take to buy a house of his own with his meager salary. House. His wife was the leader of the bandit stronghold. The entire mountain outside was his. Thinking of this, Li suddenly became enlightened. What was a first-rank official? Being a nobleman was meaningless. I was going to be the king of bandits. The man. Chapter 5. Bang! The young man punched the willow tree beside him. The trunk, which was as thick as an adult's arm, shook violently, and the leaves rustled and fell. Bitch, how dare you do this to me? Under the night sky, the man's face was purplish red, and the veins on his forehead were bulging. He looked quite ferocious and terrifying. The middle-aged woman next to him sighed and said, Rui has been stubborn since she was young. Once she has decided on something, no one can change it. Tomorrow, I will ask second granduncle to talk to her. His words should have some effect. If it still doesn't work, then let's drop this matter. I think that Rui girl is not bad. If you treat her. As the middle-aged woman spoke, she seemed to think of something when she mentioned this name. Her expression instantly became a little unnatural. She coughed twice and didn't speak anymore. Hearing the 2 words Rui, the young man's mind also appeared with a delicate face that was not inferior to that of the absolute beauty just now. His heart was slightly moved, but this impulse only lasted for a moment and immediately disappeared. His face was a little pale, and he didn't think about this matter anymore. If I had known this would happen, I would have planned this matter slowly. Rui is not young anymore. She will eventually marry someone. If I united a few people to put pressure on her, it might not be impossible. The middle-aged woman's face was full of regret. Who knew that when I urged her too much, she actually did such a thing? She sent people down the mountain to kidnap a woman. This is simply a disgrace to women. Thinking of the pretty boy lying on Lu Rui's bed in disheveled clothes, a ruthless expression appeared on the young man's face, but it quickly disappeared in the night. Ah! A sharp scream suddenly sounded from the door. The man who wanted to be the pirate king frowned slightly, and slowly opened his eyes. Li Yi had another very long nightmare. It was so real that it made people feel fear. Looking around, it was still an antique building, the decorations on the bedside, the familiar fragrance. No, it wasn't a dream. An inexplicable cold wind blew past. Lee couldn't help but shiver. This was the bad habit of sleeping naked and kicking off the quilt. He hurriedly picked up the clothes next to him, and first put on the underwear, that looked like a pair of underwear. In fact, it was no different from a loincloth. Let's just call it underwear for the time being. By the way, how do I wear this robe? It took a lot of effort to take off the bright red groom's robe yesterday. After wrapping it around his body in the morning, he realized that the style of the robe was very strange. Lee didn't know how to put it on. A small head poked in from outside the door. A timid-looking girl with her hair combed into two buns ran in and said softly, "Young master, this servant will help you change your clothes." Only now did Lee notice that this maidservant girl was carrying a stack of clothes in her arms. He thought to himself that the beauty from last night was really meticulous. Wearing that bright red groom robe was indeed a little too flashy. Thinking about it again, the scream just now was probably made by this little girl. As for the reason, Lee's old face couldn't help but turn red. Sleeping naked and being seen by others really wasn't something to be proud of. Since he had already accepted the reality, Lee simply and generously stood up and stretched out his hands, allowing the little red-faced girl to help him put on the robe. In this era, there naturally wasn't a full-length mirror. In fact, there wasn't even a real mirror. Lee held up a small bronze mirror and looked up and down a few times. The moon-white robe was just right for him. Although his hair was a little messy, the pretty boy was very handsome. His skin was fair and he had a nose and eyes. Standing in front of the mirror, there was a faint scholarly aura coming from him. A 15 or 16-year-old girl stood at the side. Her eyes secretly peeked at the handsome young master that her young miss had just snatched yesterday. Her little face immediately became even redder. Son-in-law is really handsome. Much better looking than second aunt's nephew. Just when Lee was looking at the mirror and feeling sorry for himself, the little girl seemed to have thought of something and quickly ran out. After a while, she ran back and carrying a thick stack of books. Young master, young miss said if young master wants to study, just tell this servant. The only wooden table in the room had already been heroically sacrificed last night. The little girl ran in and looked around. Finally, she put the books in her arms on a low stool at the side and said while panting, there was still a big difference between ancient and modern characters. Lee glanced at the book on the top. Just by looking at the title, he knew that it was definitely not simplified Chinese. This made him even more determined not to take the crooked path of the imperial examinations. How good was it now? He didn't need to work hard or struggle. At the age of 17, he could live a life of retirement at home. When the weather was good, he could go to his own mountain and patrol his territory. What could be more comfortable than this? He casually picked up a book and flipped to the first page. Lee only felt a boom in his mind and his mind went blank. His consciousness seemed to be constantly drifting away. His vision was a little blurry. When Lee could see clearly again, the antique room had disappeared. The beautiful little girl beside him had disappeared. In front of him were rows of familiar bookshelves. When Lee raised his head, he could see the rows of neatly numbered books. I'm back again. Standing in the familiar provincial library, Lee muttered to himself. However, following that, his consciousness was once again flooded by a messy piece of information. In the room, the little girl looked at the young master, who was holding a book and studying it seriously. Her beautiful big eyes revealed a light of admiration. She quietly closed the door and left. Annals of the Jing Kingdom. A moment later, Lee stood in the room. The book in his hand was called Annals of the Jing Kingdom. Every word in the book was deeply engraved in his mind. Even the words that were previously very rare to him became very familiar. What the hell is this? Lee's face was dull, and the heavy book in his hand fell to the ground. Fortunately, he had encountered enough unimaginable things in the past 2 days. Lee was not so scared that he collapsed to the ground. After confirming that the content of the book had been completely engraved in his mind, he moved his mind, and the scene just now appeared in front of him again. At this time, next to the bookshelf he was standing on, there was another row. However, there was only one lonely book on the newly added bookshelf. Lee glanced at it. If it was not Annals of the Jing Kingdom, What else could it be? Jing Kingdom. Although Li Yi was an engineering student with a terrible historical background, he also knew that in the 5,000 years of China, there was no such thing as Jing. What was this place? Why was the provincial library in his mind? What kind of F***king world is this? Chapter 6. In the long river of history, Li Yi could not find any familiar elements related to his memories. There were names of countries that he had never heard of, important events that he was unfamiliar with, and the wheel of history that had gone astray at some point in time. No, this wasn't going astray. This was clearly two carriages going in different directions. It was actually empty. He had thought that the development of history was in his hands, and that he could hug onto a very thick thigh, and it wouldn't be a problem for him to have a meteoric rise in the future. Now all of this had become a pipe dream. The only thing that comforted him was that being a transmigrator still had its benefits. After all, his brain was filled with an entire province's library of books and information. Although most of the knowledge was useless in this world, there was one function that he was very satisfied with. Li Yi had already discovered that any book that he touched with his hands would immediately appear in his mind. As for the contents of the book, he could also grasp it in an extremely short period of time and memorize it very firmly. In this way, at least the language of this world wasn't a difficult thing for him. Although he didn't want to take the path of the imperial examinations, Li Yi didn't want to be illiterate. Otherwise, it would really be a waste of his pretty face. At the very least, he could recite poems, do some couplets, and seduce a little girl. Of course, these things could only be thought of now. Otherwise, he might end up like the wooden table that didn't provoke anyone last night. The chubby face of a young servant girl with some baby fat appeared in front of Li Yi. "Young master, it's time to eat." He didn't feel anything at first, but when the young servant girl stood in front of him with a tray, Li Yi felt an unbearable hunger in his stomach. It seemed that he hadn't eaten anything since yesterday morning. When he looked over, he was a little dumbfounded. On the tray, there was a lonely porcelain bowl. There was porridge in the bowl, and only a few grains of rice could be counted at the bottom. It was so thin that it could even reflect Li Yi's handsome face. "You usually eat this?" Li Yi looked at the young servant girl and asked with some uncertainty. The maid nodded, completely crushing Li Yi's hopes. He had thought that he would be able to live a happy life without worrying about food or clothing. But now it seemed that even a bandit's family didn't have any surplus food. As it turned out, porridge was still porridge. To Li Yi, who was so hungry that his chest was sticking to his back, this wasn't porridge, it was his life. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but Li Yi actually felt that this was the best porridge he had ever eaten in his life. After 2 mouthfuls, the bowl of porridge was almost empty. Li Yi put down the bowl and looked at the maidservant eagerly. The girl blushed a little under his gaze. She took a step back and said in a soft voice, "Son-in-law, there's no more." When Li Yi heard this, his expression changed. Life here was different from what he had imagined. It seemed that he had to change his idea of retiring. At the very least, he had to solve the problem of food first. As a qualified foodie, Li Yi felt that he would go crazy if he ate this kind of porridge every day. After a bowl of porridge, at least he didn't feel that hungry anymore. Li Yi also felt a little better. "Second young miss." While Li Yi was lost in thought, the young servant girl inadvertently turned around and suddenly bowed in the direction of the door. Li Yi instinctively looked back and saw an extremely beautiful girl dressed in white walking in from the door. The moment he saw this girl, Li Yi's expression changed, and he couldn't help but take 2 steps back. He looked at her with a vigilant expression and said, "You, what do you want?" The girl's appearance was delicate and charming. She was not inferior to the absolute beauty that Li Yi had seen the night before. Her white clothes showed off her exquisite figure. When she saw Li Yi's actions and expression, the girl looked at him with a faint disdainful expression. Li Yi would never forget that this girl had sat on a horse and waved at those ferocious bandits. Then his tragic life had begun. Even now, his lower abdomen still hurt faintly. The reason why he was in his current situation was all thanks to this demon-like girl. If it wasn't for her, Li Yi would still be being chased by those 2 burly men and burned to death. Or he would be somewhere in the wilderness worrying about starvation. He might even be thinking about where he could stay at night, so that he wouldn't be eaten by wolves. Not only did he have a place to stay, he had porridge to drink, a beautiful wife, and a maidservant to order around. So for this girl, should Li actually thank her? When he thought about it this way, Li felt that the girl in front of him didn't seem so hateful. Now, he only hoped to be a quiet young man who ate melons. After solving the problem of food, he could retire and live out his days in the mountains. Li was still daydreaming when he saw the girl called Lu Rui, who was also his wife in name, walk in with a hunchbacked old man with grizzled hair. The old man wore a plain robe. His body looked frail, and his face was full of wrinkles. He looked kind, and at this moment, he was looking at him with half-closed eyes. Li maintained sufficient vigilance against this old man. In his opinion, any old man who looked kind could be a lunatic who would call for people to catch him and roast him over a fire at the next moment. He had almost been tricked to death by the old man he had met previously. He probably wouldn't be able to change this kind of thinking in a short period of time. Cough cough. The old man looked at him for a long time. Finally, a satisfied look appeared in his murky eyes. He nodded and said, "It's good to be a scholar, it's good to be a scholar." This handsome appearance is much better than the distant nephew of second brother's wife's wife. TSK, he's also a scholar. Our village lacks scholars. The old man seemed to be quite satisfied with his first impression of Li Yi. He muttered, "What's so good about fighting and killing all day? Unbearably vulgar, unbearably vulgar. To think that your great-grandfather was also a scholar. This bunch of disappointing people didn't inherit any of his abilities." The girl in white looked at the old man proudly and said, "Of course, don't you know who chose him?" "Good, good." The old man laughed and waved his hand. He said, "Mr. Chin of the school broke his leg a few months ago. I'm afraid he won't be able to stand up again. The little guys have been making trouble in the village all day, and I'm annoyed to see them. Now it's good that we Willow Leaf Village don't raise idle people. It's good to let him go to the school to be a teacher, so that those little guys can't always hang around in front of me." "Listen to second uncle," the girl called Lu Rui said softly. Li stood there in a daze. He had a feeling of being treated as air, and his sense of existence was extremely low. This matter was related to him. Why did they make such a hasty decision without asking if he had any opinions? Teacher? He was ready to retire. Who would want to do such a boring thing? Chapter 7. The matter of being a teacher at the school in Willow Leaf Village was happily decided. As a newcomer, Li was not familiar with everything here, so he did not dare to raise any objections. Of course, he had been complaining about the fact that there was a school in the bandits' village for a long time. As a bandit, they should learn professional knowledge such as fighting and robbing. Why should they go to school? Couldn't they learn something better? Could they become a qualified bandit in the future if they learned these things? Did they expect them to be the top scholar in the future? It had to be said that the ancient people's concept of education was very backward. Although education should start from a young age, they were obviously going the wrong way. Moreover, how would Li know how to teach? What to teach them? The self-cultivation of a bandit? The basic etiquette of robbing? The economic principle of distribution of stolen goods? He himself was almost an illiterate now. Li felt that he had no human rights here. The old man, who was half a foot into the grave, pointed at him and said a lot of things. After confirming that Li would be the teacher of the school in the stockade village, he walked away leisurely with his hands behind his back. His beautiful wife nodded slightly at him and left as well. As for the demonic girl, she looked at Li for a long time with a strange look in her eyes. Then she turned her head away proudly, leaving only a cool back view that was getting further and further away. The husband of a bandit village also has dignity. Only Li was left standing there with a sad face. After a long time, Li turned his head to look at the little servant girl standing there, scratched his head and asked, "What's your name?" "Young master, you can call me Xiaohuan." The girl with two buns rubbed the corner of her clothes uneasily and said softly, "This little servant girl is so shy." Li looked at the girl with interest and then asked, "Xiaohuan, where is the kitchen? Is there anything to eat?" For a person who had been starving for God knows how long, A bowl of porridge was not even enough to fill the bottom. In just a short while, Li Yi's stomach was hungry again. The servant girl was startled at first. Then she shook her head and said, "We don't have much food at home. Normally, we only have 2 meals a day." Young Miss said that young master didn't eat for the whole day yesterday and was afraid that he would be hungry. So she ordered Xiao Huan to cook some gruel for young master this morning. Li Yi sighed. This was actually a world where even the mountain bandits had no food to spare. The situation seemed to be more serious than he had imagined. What does Xiao Huan usually do? With nothing to do and finally having someone to talk to, Li Yi simply took 2 small stools and dragged Xiao Huan to sit outside to chat. The little servant girl still looked a little reserved. She sat there with an uneasy expression. She said softly, "Xiao Huan usually serves by Mrs.'s side. Son-in-law has just arrived. Miss said to let Xiao Huan serve son-in-law for a period of time." Honestly speaking, other than not being very passionate, this wife-in-name treated him very well. This was something that Li Yi had to admit. At the moment, he basically knew nothing about this place. At this moment, Xiao Huan became the only way for him to know about this mountain village. It seemed that this young master was not only good-looking, but also very approachable. The servant girl gradually let down her guard. Thus from her mouth Li Yi learned more things. Not to mention the outside world. The place he was at now was called Willow Leaf Village. According to common sense, if a place was called something like a ravine or a village, it was definitely not a good place. When Li Yi watched movies and TV dramas before, whenever a mountain village was mentioned, there was always a place called Black Wind. Although the Willow Leaf Stockade didn't sound as domineering as the Black Wind Stockade, their nature was basically the same. Everyone was a bandit. Those who liked a rough style were called the Black Wind Stockade. Those who were more elegant and fresh were called the Clear Wind Stockade, or the Willow Leaf Stockade. But the situation of Willow Leaf Village was a little different. It was said that in the early years when the Jing Kingdom was still in chaos, warlords were divided, and the people were destitute and homeless. The ancestors of the Lu family rose up and set up their own clan. They occupied a mountain and became a tyrant in Green Willow Mountain. They gathered a group of subordinates and started to do what they pretended to do on the surface. But in fact, they were bandits and bandits. Later, after a few decades, there was finally a hero who unified the Jing Kingdom, ending the chaos and liberating the entire Jing Kingdom. Finally, the people could live and multiply in peace. After dozens of gangs of bandits in the chaos were wiped out, the Lu family had to find a new way to survive in order to preserve their lineage. At this time, if they were still bandits under the banner of doing what they preached, it could only be said that they were too insensible. At that time, the extremely wise leader of the Lu family chose to give up. In a very short period of time, he completed the gorgeous transformation from a bandit to a good citizen. He took root in Willow Leaf Village. He plowed the fields, he weaved cloth, he fetched water, he watered the garden, and he became a common person who followed the 5 stresses and 4 beauties. The previous group of subordinates, who fought wherever they were ordered, either scattered or stayed. Finally, the scale of Willow Leaf Village was formed. However, even though the real ruler of Willow Leaf Village was the Lu family had long fallen apart and could not unite. The head of the direct branch of the Lu family died early, and now there were only 2 sisters, Lu Rui and Lu Rui. Although Lu Rui was still the leader of the village on the surface, in fact, the other branches of the Lu family had long been dissatisfied with her and secretly schemed for the resources of the direct branch. If it were not for Lu Rui's tough means and a group of old brothers who were loyal to the direct branch of the Lu family, perhaps the direct branch would have been dead long ago. When the little maid said these, her little mouth was puffed up, and her pretty face was full of grief and indignation. At this time, Li Yi had already understood that Lu Rui was his current nominal wife, and Lu Rui was the demonic girl who took him up the mountain yesterday. And the reason why he was tied up and forced to be the husband was because the direct bloodline had been pressuring Lu Rui to get married. Once she got married, wouldn't the direct bloodline's resources be divided up by them? Therefore, Li Yi became the first business of the mountain bandits again. No wonder that the young man looked at him like that night. He really took the peach from him. No, he was taken by the peach. The little maid went away nagging. Lee looked up at the sky, and his heart was a little hazy. The situation was not optimistic. Unconsciously, he had already substituted himself in his current identity. Before he became the man of the mountain bandits and dominated the great mountain road. Before he could realize his dream of retiring early and not worrying about food and clothing in his old age, it seemed that there was still a long way to go. Chapter 8. A table was divided into 4 sides. Opposite Li was his devilish sister-in-law Lu Rui. On both sides were his maidservant, Xiao Huan, and his beautiful wife Lu Rui, whom he could only look at but not touch. Beside the table, there were 3 beautiful women, one more beautiful than the other. However, Li was not in the mood to appreciate them. He was staring blankly at a bowl of plain noodles in front of him. Although it was plain noodles, it was really plain noodles. Other than the white noodles in the bowl, there was no other color. Li picked up his chopsticks and took a small bite. There was no taste at all. The taste was so bland in his mouth. This was lunch for the 4 of them. Li, who was a foodie, had high requirements for food. In the face of the bowl of vegetarian noodles in front of him, even if he was very hungry, he couldn't bring himself to eat much. He turned to look at the 3 people beside him. They could still eat with such relish. The young maidservant beside him was full of happiness. It seemed that as long as they could fill their stomachs, it was something to be happy about. In addition to being Lu Rui's personal maidservant, Xiao Huan also worked as a nanny, a cook and a cleaner. In winter, she might even be a maid to warm the bed. Li looked at the pitiful amount of noodles in her bowl and gave half of his to her. A 15 or 16-year-old girl was growing up. How could she eat so little? The young maidservant was stunned when Li suddenly took away her bowl. Son-in-law. The 2 words had just left her mouth when Li had already prepared the noodles and put the bowl back in front of her. I'm not hungry. You eat more. He reached out and rubbed the head of the young maidservant. Just as he said this, a strange sound came from his stomach. The 3 people raised their heads and looked at him strangely. Li's face couldn't help but turn red. He picked up his bowl and quickly finished the food in it. I'm full. Lu Rui stared at Li's disheveled figure for a long time. There was something that had never been there before in her beautiful eyes. Lu Rui, who was standing beside her, pursed her lips and looked at the young maidservant, who was so touched that she was about to cry. Her pretty face, which had always looked like it did not matter to her, unintentionally curved into a gentle arc. The servant girl called Xiao Huan widened her big eyes and looked at her son-in-law, who had just finished eating, who knew what he was busy with. She felt a little uneasy in her heart. In her little heart, her son-in-law was a scholar, and a scholar should stay away from places like the kitchen where only women were suitable. Of course, the little lass was more afraid that her son-in-law would waste food. There wasn't much food left at home, and they couldn't afford to waste it. Suddenly, a white doe flew out from a corner. After rolling a few times on the ground, it finally stopped. The eyes of the sturdiest hen suddenly shot out rays of light. She turned her head and looked around. She found that none of her companions had noticed the abnormality here. She was delighted. She pretended that nothing had happened and walked over with small, wobbly steps. When she walked in front of the doe, just as she was about to poke her head out to peck at it, the doe suddenly rolled forward a distance. She was caught off guard and pecked at the air. The hen took a few steps forward and was about to peck a second time when the doe once again moved forward a distance. Just like this, one of the chickens in Second Aunt's maternal home, under the lure of a small doe, finally embarked on the path of no return, in a mountain stream behind the stockade village. Li skillfully slaughtered the chicken, plucked its feathers and cleaned its internal organs. Even after a few thousand years, he was not rusty at all. The only thing that was not too smooth was that there was no hot water, so he spent a lot of time plucking the feathers. Fortunately, the overall process was considered smooth. After eating 2 meals without oil, he could finally start eating meat this time. After this series of actions, the smell on his body was not very pleasant. Li simply took a bath by the stream, When the sky turned dark, he used a coarse cloth that he had prepared to wrap the chicken that had been cleaned. He carried it in his hand and leisurely walked into the stockade village. "Son-in-law, where did you go?" Just as he entered the courtyard, Xiao Huan, who had been waiting here for a long time, immediately ran up to him. Her little face was full of anxiety. "I have nothing to do, so I went out for a walk." "What is this?" The servant girl pointed at the cloth bag in Li Yi's hand and asked curiously. When I went out for a walk just now, I picked up a pheasant." Li Yi casually gave a perfunctory reply. "Pheasant?" A curious expression appeared on the servant girl's pretty face. The pheasants near the stockade village had long been hunted, and the son-in-law did not leave the stockade village. Where did he pick it up? In the kitchen. When Li Yi opened the cloth bag, the servant girl was instantly dumbfounded. Was there a pheasant that was so fat? Moreover, not only were the feathers on its body gone, but its stomach was also cut open. After this pheasant died, what kind of torture did it go through? Chapter 9. Soak the drumsticks in water for an hour. Soak them until the residual blood is gone. Then remove the bones and cut them into small pieces. Soak the dried shiitake mushrooms in warm water. Remove the stalks and cut them into small pieces. Li Yi flipped through a book called The Complete Collection of Pasta Foods in his mind and began to prepare the ingredients for the mushroom stewed chicken noodles. It wasn't that he didn't want to make something more delicious, but the ingredients in the kitchen were pitifully few. Other than a small bag of flour, the only thing Li Yi could find were a few dried mushrooms in the corner. The flour was also very different from what he saw in the future. It was far from being as fine, and there was a lot of bran in it, so the taste was very bad. Li Yi had already experienced this when he was eating in the morning. However, from a nutritional point of view, eating this kind of coarse grain was really good for the body. Of course, more importantly, he couldn't find a better flour substitute. The useless provincial library in his mind finally played its role. Li Yi easily found a book called The Complete Collection of Pasta Foods in the recipe area. What he was going to make now was mushroom stewed chicken noodles. Mushroom stewed chicken noodles had the effect of nourishing the spleen and was very good for the human body. Li Yi chose this kind of noodles, of course. It was only because he couldn't find any other ingredients other than shiitake mushrooms and flour. A book that only Li Yi could see floated in front of him. He tore off 2 drumsticks and processed them according to the steps in the book. After the shiitake mushrooms were diced, he began to knead the noodles. Xiao Huan had long been chased out of the kitchen by him. After eating the noodles she made for lunch, Li Yi decided that he wouldn't let her interfere in anything other than cooking porridge. Kneading noodles was actually a technical job. The noodles had to be chewy to taste good. First, he had to choose a good flour. Of course, this could be ignored for the time being. When kneading the noodles, the amount of water added, the quality of salt, the strength and technique of kneading all affected the taste of the noodles. In terms of salt, Li Yi did not have any requirements. Even flour was like this. What kind of good salt could there be in this world? As for the other technical aspects, it was not difficult at all. As long as he had seen the content, it would be firmly engraved in his mind. His hands were also like God's helping him. Outside the kitchen, the little servant girl stood on a stool and looked through the window at her son-in-law's skilled kneading skills. Her beautiful big eyes could not help but widen. This son-in-law seemed to be different from the scholar she had imagined. The cooking method of stewed chicken noodles with mushrooms was really simple. There was a small vegetable garden in front of the kitchen. Li Yi found some lettuce in the vegetable garden. After taking it out of the pot, he sprinkled a handful of chopped green onions on it. A rich fragrance wafted over. Although the ingredients were limited, Li Yi was very satisfied with his work. Because it was his first time making it, Li Yi was worried about wasting food, so he only tried to make one person's portion. He fetched some water from the water tank and washed his hands. Just when he was about to taste the long-lost taste, he turned around and saw the empty stove. Li Yi was stunned for a moment, and his expression changed. F***ck, where's my noodles? A scream suddenly sounded in the kitchen. At night, the second aunt was calling the only hen in the house that laid eggs affectionately. Not long after, the affectionate call turned into vicious curses. Which D***im in person stole my chicken? Don't let me catch you. If I catch you, I'll break your legs. F***ck. Lee stood at the door and looked at the woman who was standing in front of the door with her hands on her hips. She was cursing because she had lost the chicken. Thinking of the bowl of noodles that he had mysteriously lost, he shook his head, and a deeply sympathetic expression appeared on his face. He closed the door and walked back into the house. It was a rare time for dinner, and only good food could not be wasted. Lee did not want to listen to the shrew's curses while eating. Lu Rui sat opposite Lee, and a strange expression appeared on her beautiful face. The noodles were chewy, the meat was fresh and tender, and the taste of the soup was also excellent. In reality, when she first saw the dinner, Lu Rui had some doubts in her heart. Today's dinner did not seem to be made by Xiao Huan. Not only was the fragrance rich, the bowl was not as plain as before. There was red and green, and it greatly increased one's appetite. What made her feel even more strange was that it was not New Year's or any other festival, but there was actually some meat in the bowl. After tasting a small bite, Lu Rui's beautiful eyes slightly brightened. She looked at the young servant girl and asked, "Xiao Huan, did you make tonight's dinner?" The young servant girl was immersed in the most delicious noodles she had ever eaten in her life. Hearing this, she suddenly raised her head and said, "No, it was the son-in-law." After saying this, she remembered that she had promised the son-in-law not to tell the young miss about this matter. Her little face changed slightly, and when she raised her head, she saw an extremely astonished expression on the young miss's face. Cough cough. Lee coughed dryly, and glared at the young servant girl without a trace. He said, "I have lived alone in the past, I am already used to these things." The strange expression on Lu Rui's face was still there. It was obvious that she had not digested this matter. Her eyes glanced at the piece of meat in the bowl. "This meat," pheasant chicken picked up on the road. After a long time, Lu Rui nodded and said softly, "Hubby is a scholar, these vulgar things in the future. It is better to let Xiao Huan do it." Li glanced at Xiao Huan. The young servant girl mischievously stuck out her tongue and quickly lowered her head, not daring to look at him. A 15 or 16-year-old young girl was at the age of innocence. She seemed to have discovered that her son-in-law was different from the men outside, and the young servant girl gradually became more open in front of him. Beside Lu Rui, who had been silent all this time, occasionally looked at him with a gaze as if she had discovered a new continent. She would unconsciously lick her lips from time to time, as if recalling something. After the meal, when Xiao Huan went to wash the dishes, Lu Rui seemed to have thought of something and said, "Oh yes, the school in the stronghold will reopen tomorrow. Hubby needs to make some preparations in advance." Hearing this, Li nodded but did not take it to heart. Wasn't it just a group of naughty children? Tomorrow, he would find a few books and teach them a few sentences. Then, he would make them shake their heads and memorize. If they could not memorize, they would not be allowed to go home for dinner. Was this how the ancient school looked like? Dealing with a few naughty children, Li did not have any psychological burden at all. After waking up, before he had time to eat breakfast, Xiao Huan came to inform him that it was time to go to school. Li still felt that something like a school should not appear in a bandit stronghold. Xiao Huan led him through half the stronghold, before stopping in front of a house that looked slightly more spacious than the others. Before he walked into the house, he heard a loud noise coming from inside, mixed with the laughter of naughty children. The moment Li walked in, the atmosphere suddenly stopped, and the surroundings became quiet. Clear eyes with dirty faces and curious eyes looked at him from top to bottom. Many of them seemed to be scrutinizing him. After a few seconds of silence, "Are you Sister Rui's husband?" Before Li could speak, a childish voice filled with dissatisfaction came from the side. Chapter 10. The chubby boy was about 10 years old. When Li turned his head to look at him, he saw that the boy was looking at him with an unconvinced expression. There was even a hint of scrutiny in his eyes. This kind of gaze was not rare. The other boys around him all had the same look in their eyes. Even though Li had lived 2 lives, he could not understand what these naughty children were thinking. What's with that trace of hostility? It was their first time meeting, And he did not know these naughty children at all. What right do you have to be Sister Rui's husband? At that moment, the sturdy boy looked up at Li Yi and said, "When I grow up, I want to marry Sister Rui." Li Yi was slightly stunned when he heard that, and he could not come back to his senses for a while. A naughty child who had not even fully grown his hair was thinking of marrying someone else? Looking at the other naughty children who were obviously on the same side as him, Li finally understood where their hostility towards him came from. It seemed that he had underestimated the charm of his wife. However, it was normal when he thought about it carefully. These naughty children who ran around the village naked all day knew nothing. Most of them had the guts to say that they wanted to marry a beautiful woman when they grew up. Children's words carried no harm, so the adults in the village naturally did not care about what they said. Over time, this kind of thinking would deepen in their minds day by day, and they themselves would not realize that there was anything wrong with it. However, Li Yi's appearance had dealt a devastating blow to these immature naughty children. They thought about marrying their goddess and becoming someone else's wife when they grew up, so they were naturally very indignant. Fortunately, they were only simple-minded children. If it had been someone else, they might have picked up a kitchen knife and dueled with him. He glanced at these naughty children who were like fighting cocks. Naturally, he would not be calculative with them. He coughed lightly and said, "All of you return to your seats. If you don't remember what I taught you today, you are not allowed to go home for dinner." The first meeting with the naughty brats wasn't very harmonious. Li Yi took the opportunity to show off a bit of his dignity as a teacher. He already had some understanding of the current world. The various customs and etiquette norms were roughly equivalent to ancient China, where respect for teachers was still the mainstream ideology. This kind of thinking was deeply embedded in every social stratum. So even if these naughty brats were unwilling to accept him, they still obediently returned to their seats. In the past, when Mr. Qin was around, if they were mischievous in class, Mr. Qin would tell his parents about their behavior, and they would inevitably get a spanking when they got back. To these uncivilized ordinary people, this was the only creed in educating their children. For the sake of their butts, these naughty brats didn't dare to be too presumptuous in the academy. However, even though they were all sitting in their own seats, they still had a proud expression on their faces, and their clear eyes were filled with disdain. Naughty brats were very innocent, and their thoughts were all written on their faces. Li Yi glanced at them indifferently and slowly said, "This is the first class in the morning, so we won't teach anything else. Let's tell a story first so everyone can relax." Hearing the word story, the naughty brats immediately changed their expressions and showed their interest. They grew up in Willow Leaf Village, including their own parents. The people they came into contact with were all uneducated boors, so how could they know how to tell stories? When they were really bored, they could pester second great-uncle to tell them about the legendary past of the Liu family's ancestors. However, this kind of story would get annoying if they heard too much. Mr. Qin was the only scholar in the village, but he always had a cold expression in class, which scared the naughty brats so much that they didn't even dare to breathe. Hoping to hear any interesting stories from him was just daydreaming. Before the official start of the story, Li Yi had already successfully aroused the curiosity of the naughty brats. Sitting at the very front was the sturdiest boy. Although there was a hint of anticipation in his eyes, he still curled his lips in disdain and said, "What's so good about a lousy story?" Li Yi saw the expressions of all the naughty brats, and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up. He had 10,000 ways to deal with these innocent naughty brats. Today, we're going to tell a story about a monkey. An illusory book floated in front of Li Yi's eyes. On it were the words "Journey to the West." Before the chaos was divided, the world was in chaos, and no one could see it. Ever since Panga broke the primordial world and created the distinction between pure and turbid, Li Yi read 2 sentences and suddenly felt that something was wrong. He turned around and looked at the bewildered faces of the naughty brats. Only then did he realize that he had casually picked up an original version of Journey to the West. The language was relatively obscure, and with the intelligence of these naughty brats, they definitely wouldn't be able to understand it. With a thought, he switched to a colloquial version of Journey to the West. Before the primal chaos was divided, the world was in chaos. Vast and indistinct, no one could see it. Ever since Panga broke through the primordial chaos, the world was created, clear and turbid. What Lee didn't know was that the words he just said were like thunder exploding in the minds of all the naughty brats. Although they didn't understand what this new gentleman was saying, they felt that he was very powerful. At this moment, Li Yi's magnetic voice once again reached the ears of the naughty brats. Legend has it that a long, long time ago, the world was divided into the Dongsheng Divine Continent, the Aparagodania Continent, the South Continent, and the North Continent. In the Aoli nation of the Dongsheng Divine Continent, there was a mountain of flowers and fruits. On the mountain, there was a celestial stone. One day, the celestial stone cracked, and a stone monkey jumped out of it. Its eyes shot out rays of golden light. A few seconds after Li Yi spoke, the expressions of all the naughty brats changed. Their mouths were wide open, and their eyes were filled with disbelief. The birth of the Monkey King, the apprenticeship of Bodhi, the borrowing of treasures from the Dragon Palace, and causing havoc in the heavenly court. As Li Yi spoke, the door to a strange and dazzling new world slowly opened in front of the naughty brats. This was a world that they had never come into contact with before. It was a place where immortals ruled and demons ran amok. It turned out that thunder and lightning were caused by the god of thunder and goddess of lightning striking gongs in the sky. It turned out that when people died, their souls would go to a place called the underworld. There were judges of Yama and impermanence of black and white there. It turned out that there were people who could fly in the sky and dig into the ground. It turned out that above their heads, there were countless majestic palaces. A golden-armored monkey gradually became clear in front of their eyes. Relying on a stick that could change size at will, it stirred up the wind and rain in this world. In the school, the naughty brats were already immersed in this magical world. Everyone opened their eyes wide and listened carefully. It was so quiet that there wasn't a single noise. When they heard that the monkey fought his way up to the 33 heavens alone, and that 100,000 heavenly soldiers and generals couldn't do anything to him, the chubby face of the boy sitting at the front flushed red. Even his breathing quickened, and his eyes shone with an intense light that had never been seen before. Chapter 11. Okay, let's stop here for the morning. When the story of Journey to the West reached the part about the havoc in heaven, Li estimated that it was about time, and very kindly chose to stop at the most critical part of the story. The naughty kids were just hearing about Sun Wukong's massacre, how he fought against 100,000 celestial soldiers and generals, and how he fought against the 4 heavenly kings, the mighty miracle god, and the Erlang god. Their hearts were surging with excitement, and they wished they could transform into Sun Wukong, enter that magical world, and wave the golden cudgel to wreak havoc in heaven. However, when the story reached its climax, it suddenly stopped. All of their faces turned red with anxiety, and their hearts were extremely upset. Li Yi, however, acted as if he didn't see this scene. He walked to the side of the sand table and wrote the word Lu on it with his finger. Then he said, "When you come to school in the afternoon, all of you must be able to write this word. When everyone can write the word Lu, I'll tell the rest of the story." With that, he leisurely walked out of the school with his hands behind his back. As soon as he walked out, the group of naughty kids gathered in front of the sand table. "Sir said we must all learn this word. Is this our Lu character? Move, let me see how to write it." At this time, the naughty kids seemed to have forgotten that they still had a deep hatred with Li Yi. They stared at the word on the sand table and tried their best to remember it. The naughty kids had very strong self-esteem. They didn't want to drag everyone down just because they didn't remember it. Moreover, everyone was looking forward to the next development of the story, and what would happen to the magical monkey. All of you better remember this word. If anyone can't write it in the afternoon, I'll beat you up. The boy with the strongest build and a small round face stretched out his finger to write the word Lu in the air, and made a fierce expression as he threatened the naughty kids around him. When he thought of the monkey that could fly in the sky and dive into the ground, knew the 72 transformations, and was omnipotent, he felt an uncontrollable excitement in his heart. At this time, Li stood in front of his house, watching a flock of hens foraging for food on a small slope not far away. He couldn't help but miss the bowl of mushroom chicken noodles from yesterday. Those children are very mischievous and hard to discipline. It's my husband's first day as a teacher. Are you used to it? A voice suddenly sounded in his ear. Li jumped in fright and turned his head abruptly. Only then did he realize that Lu Rui was already standing beside him without him noticing. Li was still shocked. Did this woman not make a sound when she walked? Moreover, she actually took the initiative to talk to him, which made Li feel a little flattered. Although they were husband and wife in name, they were more like strangers. Rui used Li to shut those people's mouths, and Li relied on her to live off her. If he didn't stay in the village, he was afraid that he would either starve to death or be tied to a pillar and burned to death. He finally calmed down and said, "They are a little naughty, but they are still respectful to the teacher. My wife, you don't have to worry." With that, Li thought of something again. He looked up at Lu Rui and asked, "May I ask my wife, how much is the monthly salary of a teacher in the school? And what kind of rules are there for the tuition?" Li specially understood the rules of the school. There was no need to talk about the apprenticeship ceremony or the admission ceremony. It was fine to skip it since it wasn't important. However, there should be some tuition fees, right? It couldn't be helped. His family was already so poor that they couldn't even feed themselves. If he didn't think of something, he would only be able to eat in the future. The so-called tuition was the apprenticeship fee. When a student and a teacher met for the first time, they needed to give a gift to show their respect. In his heart, Li was still looking forward to relying on these tuition fees to improve his life a little. It seemed that she didn't expect that Li would ask this question. Rui's expression froze slightly. After a moment, she looked at Li and her expression became strange. She shook her head and said, "The teacher in the village school doesn't have a monthly salary, and the tuition fees don't have it either." What? Hearing this, Li didn't react for a moment. He thought that he had heard wrong and was stunned. No salary? No tuition fees? Then he would work for nothing. Since ancient times, there had never been such a thing. Even if he was a long-term worker in Zhou Shifu's house, he had to pay him, right? What's more, being a teacher was a very sacred profession. Even if he didn't have a salary, he should receive some gifts to improve his life, right? These mountain bandits didn't even know the most basic manners. They were not particular at all. Li sighed and suddenly felt a little tired. He turned around and walked back with a lonely face. There was still half a chicken left from yesterday. He wanted to make something delicious to comfort his wounded heart. For most people in the Willow Leaf village, today was a very ordinary day. They worked as usual, thinking that there was not much food left at home, so they had to save some food in the future. Last year's harvest was not good, so they had to work hard for a period of time to catch up with this year's new grain. However, the people of the Lu family who had children at home felt a little different. The naughty children who used to play wildly in the village all day and would never go home without shouting 3 times at mealtime suddenly became quiet. They didn't run around, but squatted in the open space in front of their homes, holding a branch in their hands and writing and drawing. No one knew what they were doing. In this way, the parents of the naughty children felt uneasy. In this era where the majority of people were ignorant, any unusual action would be classified as being possessed by evil spirits or something like that. Their own children were treasures, so of course they wouldn't just roast them on the fire indiscriminately. After observing their children for a long time, a middle-aged man finally couldn't help but walk over and kick the naughty child's butt. "Coward, what are you doing here?" He turned around and saw his father standing behind him. The naughty child wiped his snot and pointed to the crooked words he had just written on the ground. He said proudly, "Father, this is the word Lu. The teacher taught us this morning. You don't know it, right?" The middle-aged man looked down and saw that the ground was indeed scratched by the branch. As for the word Lu that his naughty child pointed at, in his eyes, it was just a bunch of scribbles. Looking at the naughty child's proud expression, as if he was looking down on his illiteracy, the man was infuriated. He lifted his leg and kicked the naughty child's butt. "You've only been in school for half a day, and you dare to mock me? Even if I've never been educated, I'm still your father. Lee was in the kitchen. He had just cut the chicken into thin shreds and was preparing to make chicken porridge when he suddenly raised his head and looked in the direction of the window. He listened carefully for a while and mumbled, "Whose naughty child is crying so badly?" He shook his head and continued working. "Eat slowly, no one's fighting with you." During lunch, the middle-aged woman looked at the naughty child who was uncharacteristically stuffing rice into his mouth, but didn't touch his favorite food at all. Confusion appeared in her eyes. "What's wrong with my child today?" The naughty child hurriedly finished eating and threw the bowl on the table. He broke into a run, as if the outside world had an endless attraction for him. "You just finished eating, where are you going?" the woman shouted anxiously as she chased after him. "To school," the devilish brat replied loudly, then disappeared without a trace. He left the woman standing on the spot with a stunned expression. This little brat used to not go to school even if he was in a hurry. Why did he suddenly change today? Similar things happened in many families in Willow Leaf Village. At noon that day, all the naughty children's parents were collectively stunned. Chapter 12. When Lee walked into the school in the afternoon, what he saw was completely different from what he saw in the morning. "Hello, sir." All the naughty kids sat in their seats with their heads held high and their chests puffed out. They bowed to him with a solemn expression, and their crisp voices were very pleasing to the ear. At this moment, Lee actually felt a sense of pride and satisfaction as a gardener of the motherland. Naughty kids were good. They were simple, gullible, and didn't hold grudges. "Do you remember the words I taught you this morning?" Lee didn't sit in the teacher's seat at the very front. He casually sat down next to one of the naughty kids and asked. "Yes." Hearing Lee's question, the naughty kids said in unison. The naughty kid sitting next to Lee looked a little uneasy, but he felt that this teacher was different from the previous Mr. Chin. Mr. Chin always sat in front with a stern face, as if someone owed him a few strings of money. He never sat with them. "All right, let's check first. Who wants to go first?" Lee looked at the naughty kids and asked. It took a lot of courage to be the first to eat crabs. The naughty kids looked at each other a few times, but no one was willing to go first. "I'll go first." Suddenly a voice came from Lee's side. It sounded like it took a lot of effort to muster up the courage. Lee turned his head and saw the naughty kid who told him that he would marry Lu Rui when he grew up. He stood up from his seat and looked a little eager. "All right, it's you then. What's your name?" Lee looked at him and said with a smile, "Sir, my name is Lu Xiaohu." It seemed that Lee's smile infected the naughty kid. His expression also relaxed. He walked to the sand table, took out a small branch from his sleeve, and wrote on the sand table. Lee got up and walked over. He bent down to take a look. Although the naughty child's handwriting was crooked and a little childish, he could tell that he must have used some strength after he went down. He nodded and patted the naughty child's head. "Very good. Everyone should learn from little Tiger in the future. Be braver." Naughty children also had vanity. Lu Xiaohu's heart was as sweet as honey when his teacher told them to learn from him in front of so many of his friends. His chubby face was flushed with excitement, and he walked down with his head held high. With Lu Xiaohu taking the lead, things became much simpler. The naughty kids came up one after another to be examined. The results surprised Lee. He knew that the previous Mr. Chin could only make these naughty children shake their heads and recite some things. They were far from being literate. But this time, everyone wrote the word Lu correctly. Was the story of Sun Wukong so attractive to them? It was hard to guess the thoughts of the naughty children, and Lee was too lazy to guess them. As long as they were obedient, everything would be fine. When they were all seated, with their heads held high and chests puffed out, Lee asked, "Where were we this morning?" "Go to the west and invite Buddha." The naughty children answered in unison. The recent abnormal behavior of the naughty children in Willow Leaf Village had attracted the attention of all the naughty children's parents. Sometimes, they would see their children holding a wooden stick and chasing a black dog in the village, shouting, "Howling celestial dog, where do you think you're going? Howling celestial dog, die." Now that the black dog saw these naughty children, it screamed and ran far away. That was only the first symptom. Later on, they even muttered to a spider, a centipede and a scorpion. The naughty children caught these things and pointed at them with sticks. After muttering for a long time, they stomped them to death and laughed loudly, saying that they were slaying demons. What's more, they stole a gourd from somewhere and went behind others shouting, XX Lou, I call you, do you dare to answer? If it was someone else who did this, they would have tied him up and roasted him on the fire. But it was their children who were crazy. They couldn't do it no matter what. Some people were so worried that there were more wrinkles on their faces these days. Of course, the parents of the naughty children, who were illiterate in the past, were now able to write their names on the ground with a wooden stick. Even though they didn't understand what they were saying, they could tell that it was very mysterious and impressive. This made the parents of the naughty children so shocked that their jaws dropped. And the source of all this was the new teacher in the school. It was said that he was the husband that Rui kidnapped when she went down the mountain. Some people saw him from afar. He was handsome, but his body was thin, as if a gust of wind could blow him over. However, he seemed to be quite capable. Even Mr. Chin couldn't control the naughty children, but they were obedient in front of him. It was extremely strange. Some of the naughty children's parents were even worried that the scholar had used some evil magic on their children. After all, those scholars were very evil. They were vigilant and did not allow the naughty children to go to school. However, he never expected that as soon as he said that the naughty child was forbidden to go to school, his child would immediately lie on the ground and roll around, wiping his snot and tears on his body. He wouldn't get up from the ground if he wasn't allowed to go to school. Li did not expect that the naughty children would be so good at applying what they learned on the spot. They had learned Monkey Sun's ability to make a scene and roll on the ground in such a short time. Adults who had never experienced this kind of new trick could not deal with it at all. In desperation, they could only join forces to find second great uncle and persuade him to change to another teacher. If this went on, they didn't know what their children would become. What are you panicking for? He is a scholar. Do you still need to teach him how to teach? The old man with white hair and beard lay at the door and basked in the sun. He impatiently waved his hand at the crowd and said, "Go do what you need to do, you bunch of idiots. Don't worry about this anymore." After everyone left helplessly, the old man stretched himself, and a satisfied smile appeared on his old face. He murmured, "It's so comfortable without these little brats bothering me all day." Although there were many disagreements within the Lu family, other than Lu Rui, this old man was the one they heard the most about in the village. As the oldest elder in the Lu family, second great uncle had absolute authority in the village. Since second great uncle had spoken, the crowd no longer forbade the naughty children from going to school. They could not help but sigh when they thought about the changes that the naughty children had undergone during this period of time. That handsome scholar, although he was only the husband that Rui had snatched back to suppress the stronghold, he probably had some ability. Chapter 13. At this moment, the capable and handsome scholar in the eyes of the naughty children's parents was wearing an apron and humming a tune as he worked leisurely in the kitchen. The same rice and flour, the same ingredients, Li Yi's cooking always tasted better than Xiao Huan's. This was a conclusion that Lu Rui came to after comparing them. The two meals that were originally meant to fill one's stomach had actually become something to look forward to. Ordinary porridge and noodles under his hands could be made into different flavors every time. Sometimes, just a glance or a whiff of the aroma would greatly increase one's appetite. When the reason for eating was no longer just to fill one's stomach, it seemed that the whole life became better. After a few times, Lu Rui no longer mentioned anything like, "A gentleman stays away from the kitchen." Sometimes, she was curious as to why a scholar would be so passionate about cooking in front of the stove. In this era where everything else was inferior, it was hard to imagine that a scholar would actually lower his own status to do the cooking of a chef. Where was his dignity as a scholar? Lu Rui had seen many scholars, and most of them gave her the impression that they were arrogant and had their eyes on the top of their heads. Without a doubt, this husband of hers did not look like an orthodox scholar. but he was clearly different from the others. Lu Rui was not sure whether he had talent or not, but she thought that he could not be too bad. That group of lawless children, who couldn't be controlled by anyone, were obedient in his hands. In just a few days, they had undergone a change that made everyone exclaim in surprise. It was also far beyond Lu Rui's expectations. Of course, Lu Rui was also quite surprised when she heard from Xiao Huan about the stories that Li Yi told the children in class. How did he think of those things? During this period of time, it seemed that even the entire stockade village had undergone some small changes. In the beginning, to Lu Rui, Li Yi was just an act to temporarily shut the mouths of some people who kept forcing her to marry him. They were just a fake couple in name. She thought that after a period of time, when things settled down, if he wanted to leave, she would let him go. In fact, Lu Rui had made some preparations in her heart. She had predicted that he would resist and escape. But no matter what, he didn't expect that he actually didn't reveal any such thoughts from the beginning to the end. Instead, he integrated into this place at an unbelievable speed. Although they met every day, Lu Rui felt that she had never seen through him. What a strange scholar. Generally speaking, Li Yi was quite satisfied with his current life. This was a leisurely and joyful feeling that he had never experienced in his previous life. Every day, he just had to cook and give lessons to the naughty children. It wasn't difficult at all. It was so relaxing that it was hard to describe. As for escaping, why run? If he ran away, what would he eat? Where would he live? And where would he find such a beautiful wife? He wasn't stupid. Since he was already living a carefree life of early retirement, why would he seek trouble for himself? Li Yi had always felt that he was a person who was easily satisfied. This was a good thing. Hello, teacher. When he walked into the school, the naughty children were already seated properly. They were well-mannered and had a faint look of anticipation on their faces. Before the end of the previous day, Li Yi had once again pinned the end of the story on a huge cliffhanger. The naughty children were probably already impatient. From the dark circles under their eyes, it could be seen that they definitely didn't sleep well last night. This also slightly satisfied some of the bad taste in Li Yi's heart. Getting closer to the naughty children was a very simple matter. All Li Yi had to do was tell them a story every day and teach them how to write their names or other words that the naughty children were willing to learn, such as Sun Wukong, Jade Emperor, Buddha, and so on. The effect was surprisingly good, and by now, every naughty child had mastered at least a dozen words. Li Yi, who had more than 10 years of experience as a student, knew better than anyone else that interest was the best teacher. Passive indoctrination was never as good as active learning. Although his method was a little like luring underage children, the effect was extremely obvious. At this time, there were more naughty children in the school than at the beginning, and there were even a few girls among them. According to the normal historical trend, the idea of favoring boys over girls should be spread in this world for hundreds, or even thousands of years. Even in Willow Village, the idea of letting the girls sit in the school like the boys had never been to school was never thought before. But the story of the monkey was too tempting. Even the girls couldn't avoid it. Maybe some naughty children heard the story in class and went down to show it off in front of their friends who had never been to school. After that, whenever Li Yi was in class, there would always be a few small figures outside the door or in front of the window, standing there timidly, but not daring to come in. Li Yi had never been poisoned by the idea of favoring boys over girls. Since they liked it, he let the girls come in and listen to it together. It had been a few days. However, sometimes some embarrassing things still happened. Every naughty child had a dream of being a hero, and everyone wanted to become the omnipotent Sun Wukong. When Lu Xiaohu was arguing with a little girl about who Sun Wukong was, because of his clumsy mouth, he didn't know where the inspiration came from. He directly took off his pants, pointed at a little thing that had just begun to develop, and said confidently, "Sir said that the monkey is male and has a little thing. I have a little thing, but you don't, so I am Sun Dashing." Lu Xiaohu's reason was so good that no one could find a word to refute it. Even Li Yi was speechless. After the little girl was stunned for a moment, She didn't know if she was sad that she couldn't be Sun Wukong, but she burst into tears. Lu Xiaohu also cried, because the little girl went home and told the whole story to her parents. When the little girl's parents came to the door and heard the story, Second Aunt Wu was immediately furious. She slapped Lu Xiaohu's buttocks with her palm, that was like a cattail leaf fan. At that time, Li Yi was just a wall away, and he could only helplessly shake his head. He silently mourned for the naughty child for a moment. Why did he have such a mother? Then he did what he had to do. By the way, Xuanzang and his group came to Womanland and mistakenly drank the water of Zima River. All of them became pregnant. Li Yi was used to telling the naughty children a story first, and then teach them some things. He casually sat in the middle of the naughty children and continued the story from last time. In the classroom, the naughty children pricked up their ears and listened attentively. Outside the window, Lu Rui crossed her arms and leaned against the window. Her charming face showed an expression of interest. Chapter 14. Under the instruction of his second granduncle, Li Yi had the final say in everything related to the school. This made Li Yi very satisfied. To some extent, the old man was very open-minded therefore. Whether he would have 2 days of classes or 2 days off, it all depended on his mood. The purpose of the school in Willow Leaf Village was to prevent these naughty children from running around in the village, so that the adults, or to be exact, the old man, would not be annoyed. Rather than saying that Li Yi was a teacher, he was more like a nanny. At best, he was a capricious nanny. Today, he willfully gave the naughty children a day off. As for the reason, was there a need for a reason for a holiday? However, although there was another day to rest, Li Yi was not in a good mood. In the past, although Li Yi's family was not rich, he did not live a hard life. After he came to this world, even if he cooked in different ways every day, it would be difficult for a talented scholar to cook without rice. Every day he would either have porridge or noodles. After a long time, no one would be able to stand it. In this respect, Li Yi felt that he was not even as good as the 3 women. Even Xiao Huan and the others did not say anything. They ate happily every day. It was a little too delicate for a man to complain about this and that. Alas, Li Yi let out a long sigh. He missed the days when he was raised by his mother like a pig at home. Food always came to him, and he didn't need to cook for himself. After he came here, he was busy in the kitchen every day. Even his cooking skills, which had been neglected for a long time, improved at a rocket-like speed. He had been missing for so long. He did not know how sad his mother would be, and his group of friends. Every time he thought of this, Li Yi began to feel gloomy. Xiaohu, little bastard, where did you go? Come back for dinner. Next door, his second aunt, Mrs. Wu, called her son for dinner again. In the village, Lu Xiaohu was the most naughty. In addition, he was much stronger than the other naughty children, so he was the king of the children in Willow Leaf Village. Auntie, brother who said that we don't have to wait for him when it's time to eat. He's going to the other side of the mountain to rescue a monkey that's trapped under the mountain. Hearing Madame Wu yelling at the top of her lungs, a mischievous child who was playing on a mound nearby raised his head. His nose was foaming as he pointed at a mountain in the distance that vaguely resembled a palm, and said loudly, "Madame Wu." When Madame Wu heard this, her expression immediately changed. He hurriedly locked the door and ran in the direction the brat had pointed. Li Yi was stunned at the door. The women of the Willow Leaf Village were really tough. Even the second aunt, who had a round body, could burst out with such a speed. "Hello, mister." The brat looked up and saw Li Yi standing at the door. He immediately stood up and bowed respectfully. In front of Li Yi, these naughty children had always been well behaved. Li Yi waved his hand, and the naughty children ran away. Although Li Yi was very approachable in class, he was still a teacher. The naughty children were still a little afraid of him. Li Yi raised his head and looked at the mountain in the distance. 2 days ago, Lu Xiaohu and a few naughty children hid in a corner and discussed going to the Wuji Mountain to rescue a monkey. It turned out that they were talking about this. Looking at second Aunt Wu's attitude, he was afraid that he couldn't save the monkey, so he had to think of a way to save himself first. A fat hen walked in front of him, which made Li Yi start to miss the bowl of mushroom chicken noodles that he had not long ago. Suddenly, as if he realized something, Li Yi turned his head and looked in the direction where Madame Wu left. He seemed to be thinking about something. Lu Xiaohu was not here, and neither was Madame Wu. I've decided. I'll have an extra meal tonight. It was still at the familiar creek behind the village. Li Yi took out a pair of scissors that he had already prepared from a cloth bag. He skillfully killed the chicken, plucked its feathers, cut open its stomach, and cleaned up some of the useless innards. After finishing all of his work, he suddenly felt something and turned his head to look. He saw a delicate figure standing on a large rock not far behind him with her arms crossed. She was looking at him with a teasing expression. Li Yi's expression froze, and the scissors in his hand fell to the ground. What a coincidence! He greeted her awkwardly. It was obviously not something to be proud of to be caught stealing chickens, especially when the person who saw him was his nominal sister-in-law. No matter how thick Li Yi's skin was, he couldn't help but feel embarrassed at this moment. Lu Rui glanced at Li Yi indifferently, but didn't say anything. With a light tap of her toes, she floated down the large rock, and her figure quickly disappeared from Li Yi's sight. Seeing her figure disappear, Li Yi let out a long sigh of relief in his heart. It seemed that this always cool sister-in-law had no intention of snitching. After thinking about it carefully, she was also one of the people who split the loot last time. There was no reason for her to harm others without benefiting herself. With this thought, Li Yi also relaxed. He skillfully wrapped up the chicken and walked in the direction of the village. When he reached the door, in the courtyard next door, Lu Xiaohu was crying miserably. Madame Wu was probably really angry this time, and planned to teach Lu Xiaohu an unforgettable lesson. The brat's pitiful cries lasted for twice as long as before. What a sin! Li Yi shook his head and walked into his courtyard. Xiao Huan sat at the entrance of the kitchen in a daze. Ever since Li Yi didn't allow her to go into the kitchen, she had nothing to do at mealtime. Hearing footsteps at the door, she suddenly looked up and saw her son-in-law walking in with a familiar cloth bag. She stood up in surprise and said, "Son-in-law, you found a pheasant again." Compared to modern times, people's diet was still very simple. Most of it was steaming and boiling. After eating too much bland food, Li Yi really missed the taste of stir-frying. But at this time, vegetable oil was still very rare. At least in the village, there was no such thing that only the rich could enjoy. As for stir-frying vegetables with lard, if one got high blood pressure or high blood fat, there was no cure in this place. Moreover, this was something that Li Yi couldn't accept psychologically. A bowl of plain shredded chicken noodles, without many side dishes, could still be eaten with relish. The only thing that affected people's mood was that when they were eating, Madame Wu once again stood in front of their door with her hands on her hips. She turned on her shrew mode and cursed the thief who stole her hen with incomparably vicious words. Currently, what Xiao Huan admired the most was Li Yi's culinary skills. Of course, every time he went out for a walk, he would be lucky enough to find a fat pheasant. Recently, when Li Yi was cooking, the young maidservant would often watch from the side and fantasize about when her culinary skills would become as good as her son-in-law's. Not only his culinary skills, but the son-in-law's luck was also very good. Every time he went out for a walk, he could find a pheasant. Unlike second aunt, who couldn't even keep an eye on her own chickens. Li Yi keenly noticed that the atmosphere in the stronghold seemed to have changed over the past few days. Lu Rui, who had always been a loner, began to gather with some of the young girls in the village who were the same age as him. Xiao Huan, who usually didn't go far, also began to go in and out frequently. He didn't know what she was busy with. When Li Yi finally couldn't help but ask the question in his heart, the young maidservant raised her head and revealed 2 shallow dimples. She smiled and said, "Have you forgotten, son-in-law? In a few days, it will be the Qiao festival." To some extent, Li Yi preferred this backward in 7. Since the begging for Qiao festival was approaching, she could find an excuse to give the naughty children a holiday. However, the naughty children who used to love holidays often counted on their fingers. There were only a few days left before they could go to school again. The monkey's story had just reached a wonderful part. Seeing Xiao Huan carrying 2 clay pots into the kitchen, Li followed her in and asked in confusion, "What are these?" "This is sesame oil, and this is icing sugar." Huan put down the 2 pots and pointed at them respectively. "Sesame oil? Icing sugar?" Li was stunned. He moved closer to the 2 pots and looked at them. His face suddenly lit up. "This is sesame oil? This is it white sugar?" Huan nodded and said, "Young master, you're so smart. Sesame oil is made from sesame. The Double Seventh Festival is in 2 days. We need to make some chow fruit in advance." Li did not know what chow fruit was, and he did not want to know. He did not hear what Huan said. At this moment, Li only had eyes for the 2 pots. To be precise, he was looking at the things in the pots. Oh my God! He finally saw white sugar and vegetable oil after being here for so long. In Li's mind, the fresh and delicious fried chicken steak and the sweet and sour pork tenderloin appeared. Huan saw her young master's eyes staring at the pots of sesame oil and icing sugar. She seemed to have thought of something, and her face suddenly changed. She stepped in front of Li and looked at him pitifully and said, "Young master, sesame oil and icing sugar are used to make chow fruit. There's only so much in the stockade. We can't waste it." "What do you mean waste? We're doing serious business. If there's no tenderloin, let's fry a chicken steak first." Li rubbed the little servant girl's head and reached out to the pot of sesame oil. "No." The little servant girl immediately panicked. She hugged Li's hand and did not let him take another step forward. The sesame oil and icing sugar were bought by all the girls in the stockade in order to make chow fruit. The sesame oil was very expensive. If it wasn't for the chow fruit festival, it would be impossible to see it on a normal day. Li did not expect the little servant girl, who was usually obedient to him, to be so unyielding on this matter. The atmosphere suddenly became awkward. Although the little servant girl was young, her body was almost fully developed. She was curvy in all the right places. Li's arm was hugged by her and kept shaking and rubbing against it. It was inevitable that he would touch 2 soft mounds. This was the first time Li felt such a temptation in his life. He immediately felt his blood rush to his head, and his brain was a little short of blood. He hurriedly said, "Okay, if Xiao Huan says no, then no. Let go of me first." "Really?" Xiao Huan blinked her big innocent eyes and asked in disbelief. "Really?" Li nodded his head with great sincerity. She was still a young girl. Seeing Li's solemn promise, Xiao Huan let go of his arm. But when she put it down, she seemed to think of something. Her pretty face turned red. She rubbed the corner of her clothes uneasily and lowered her head, not daring to look at Li. "Now you know to be shy?" Li glanced at the little servant girl's shy look and could not help but find it funny. He rolled his eyes and suddenly said, "Xiao Huan, why don't we have a discussion?" Discuss what?" The little servant girl lowered her head and continued to rub the corner of her clothes. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito. It had to be said that Li was very talented in deceiving naughty children and seducing ignorant girls. Not long after, under Li's half seduction and half coercion, Xiao Huan had no choice but to reach an agreement with him. Li could help her make the qiaogua. While ensuring the quantity of the qiaogua, the remaining sesame oil and icing sugar could be kept and not returned. Anyway, they did not know exactly how much they used. In previous years, there was not a single bit left. Xiao Huan did not have any doubts about Li's culinary skills. She simply told him how to make the qiaogua and went out to do other things. Seeing the little servant girl's delicate figure walk out, Li's lips curled into a smile. She wanted to return what was in his hands. Dream on. Chapter 16. Qiao fruit was also known as qixi fruit or qiao fruit. It was a food for the Qiao festival. Apart from eating it, women would also use colorful threads to thread the qiao fruit and throw it to the roof. On the night of qixi, the magpies would carry the fruit and build a bridge. The cowherd and the weaver girl would meet on the bridge. The method of making qiao fruit was not complicated. The main ingredients were sesame oil, flour, and icing sugar. Of course, it would be better if honey could be added. Xiao Huan had already told Li Yi how to make qiao fruit. First, the icing sugar, which was white sugar, was melted into syrup in a pot. Then flour and sesame seeds were added. The dough was molded into various shapes, and then fried in the sesame oil until it was cooked. Flour and honey were common ingredients. As for sesame oil and icing sugar, they were more expensive. Ordinary families in the village would not have them all the time. Every year, only during the Qiao festival, or the New Year would they be willing to spend money to buy some. These things were gathered by the unmarried girls in the stockade village with great difficulty. Only they would attach so much importance to the Qiao festival. Li Yi glanced at the clay pot filled with sesame oil. Isn't it just frying a qiao fruit? Do you need so much oil? What a waste. He took out an empty clay pot from the kitchen and folded it in half. White sugar. It's not good to eat too much sweets. It's easy to have tooth decay. Just like that, the jar of icing sugar was also half empty. The quality of the flour looks good. If I shrink each qiao fruit a little, I should be able to save a lot. It just so happens that we're running out of food at home. About 1/3 of the flour was kept by Li Yi. After all the preparations were done, Li Yi began to knead the dough. He had already done the whole set of movements smoothly. After kneading the dough, he looked at the qiao fruit mold on the side. It was too ugly, no need. With a thought, a modern instruction book on how to make pastries immediately appeared in front of him. Countless pieces of messy information poured into his mind. Li closed his eyes and digested it for a while. Then he cut off a small piece of dough and kept kneading it with his fingers. After a while, a jade rabbit model appeared in his hand. With this heaven-defying cheating device in his head, the time needed to transform theory into practice was greatly reduced. At this moment, Li Yi was like a pastry chef with many years of experience. His hands moved very fast. In a short period of time, the dough in his hands would become a vivid little animal. As his movements became more practiced, the figure of a woman in a palace dress gradually appeared in his hands. The woman looked up at the sky, her fairy dress fluttering in the wind, as if she would fly away in the next second. Even the expression of the masked woman was very detailed. If one looked carefully, one could vaguely see that the woman's appearance was somewhat similar to Lu Rui. It couldn't be helped. It was impossible for Li Yi to think of the image of a weaver girl out of thin air. There was no such thing as a baseless imagination in the world. He must rely on someone or something familiar. The people Li Yi often saw were Xiao Huan and Lu's sister Rui. Among the three, Lu Rui's temperament was more in line. Son-in-law, why is there so little sesame oil left? Xiao Huan, who had just walked into the kitchen from outside, saw that there was obviously too much sesame oil in the pot. She stared at Li Yi and asked, "It doesn't matter how much oil there is, as long as there is enough." Li Yi finished kneading the last qiao fruit. He clapped his hands and touched the little servant girl's pretty face, leaving a white mark. He smiled and said, "Okay, you settle the rest by yourself, son-in-law." The servant girl's dissatisfied voice dragged out. Son-in-law sometimes had the temperament of a child, always teasing her. Xiao Huan's face was covered with flour. She was about to go to the side to wash her face when she saw the qiao fruit that Li Yi had just kneaded. Her beautiful eyes widened involuntarily. She stopped there and cried out, "Ah! Xiao Huan, are the qiao fruits done?" A few girls around her age walked in from outside. After a while, small exclamations sounded in the kitchen. "These qiao fruits are really beautiful. I can't even bear to put them into the pot." Xiao Huan, did you need all these? When did you learn to do this? This is the jade rabbit. This is Chong Yi. This should be the weaver girl and the cowherd. These are even more beautiful than the ones I saw in the market. The weaver girls that they needed do not look like anything. They cost 5 copper coins each. Rows of qiao fruits were arranged neatly on the chopping board. They were different from the molds that they had prepared. The animals and people were all brand new. Those animals were charmingly naive, and were exactly the type that the young girls liked. What surprised them even more were the vivid and lifelike characters. Not only did they have all kinds of clothes, even their expressions were extremely lifelike. The degree of exquisiteness was unprecedented. Xiao Huan was already drowned in the praises of the crowd. Although she did not make these chow fruits, the young miss had told her not to let outsiders know that it was the son-in-law who usually cooked. Even though the young servant girl was a little embarrassed, she did not open her mouth to explain. The son-in-law was her son-in-law. Praising the son-in-law or praising Xiao Huan, it was all the same. The young servant girl thought this sweetly in her heart. Hey Xiao Huan, is that your son-in-law? Just as Xiao Huan's heart was bubbling with happiness, a young girl suddenly moved to her side and pointed at the handsome young man who was reading in the corner of the courtyard. She asked in a low voice. When the other young girls heard this, they all gathered around. Recently, Xiao Huan's family had a very strong presence in the stockade village, so the young girl's heart was full of curiosity. This was still an era where everything else was of low quality, and only books were of high quality. Scholars were like the first-class protected animals in the country. You could not find a few even if you walked around the surrounding villages. Young girls generally liked scholars. This was almost an unchanging rule in ancient times. Even if it was a poor scholar, there would be a lot of young girls in love who were willing to devote themselves to him. Nowadays, life was not important. What they valued was the potential of a scholar. If one was lucky enough to pass a high school and be promoted to a noble, good days would come. Even if this possibility was very slim, it was enough to make many young girls fall in love. Of course, the only scholar in the Willow Leaf Stockade, Mr. Qin, who was already over 60 years old, was not within the scope of the young girl's interest. He was handsome, well-educated, and gave people a feeling of being genteel. He was not at all like those rough men in the stockade village. The interesting stories that he told the children had long been spread among the young girls' circle. Every time they heard something interesting, it made these young girls' hearts itch. For the young girls who had never seen a serious scholar, Li almost fulfilled all their fantasies. In the Willow Leaf Stockade, there were also many young girls who admired him. However, no one dared to steal the husband of the stockade village chief. All the young girls could do was to hide in a corner where they could not see and peep with blushing faces. Achoo! Li Yi, who was holding a book in his hand, seemed to be reading hard, but was actually in a state of absent-mindedness, sneezed for no reason. He scratched the back of his head in confusion and murmured, "It's only July. The weather has turned cold so quickly?" Chapter 17. The noon sun was just right. It was warm but not hot. A light breeze caressed his face. It was very comfortable. It was the most suitable place to take a small stool and take a nap at the door. Li sat on the small stool and leaned against the wall with his eyes half closed. The sunlight shone on his body and warmed him up. He was extremely comfortable. With his current body, his skin was so white that even women would be jealous of him. He was completely a gigolo. Li planned to tan a little. He might not be tanned to a bronze color, but he would at least look a little manly. The only fly in the ointment was that the stool under his buttocks was too hard. It was uncomfortable to sit on. He wondered when he could make a recliner. He could lie on it every noon and bask in the sun. His life would become better. Xiao Huan cleaned the yard and spread a clean coarse cloth. She took out the books from Li Yi's room and placed them on the cloth. Scholars had the habit of drying books on the 7th day of the 7th month to show off their talent. The more books one had, the more knowledgeable the owner was. Li did not care about this custom. It was just a few lousy books at home. What was there to show off? He had an entire library in his head. There were millions of books covering all kinds of books. He was ahead of this world by hundreds or thousands of years. When had he ever shown off? Opening his eyes, he saw a delicate figure busy in the yard. He pointed to a corner in the room and said, "Xiao Huan, there are a few books there. Don't forget to take them out to dry." "I know, son-in-law." The servant girl raised her head and smiled, revealing 2 shallow dimples. She trotted into the room. When Xiao Huan ran over, a fragrant wind blew past him. Li took a deep breath. He felt that the world had become beautiful. Life seemed to have slowed down countless times. Thinking of the busy days in the past, it was really like his previous life. There was no nightlife. After dark, it truly represented the end of the day. Sleeping early and waking up early. The previous Li would never have thought that one day, he would actually live such a healthy and regular life. Just as he was sighing in his heart, he suddenly heard a rustling sound by his ear. Opening his eyes, he turned his head to look, and saw that the servant girl was squatting on the ground, holding a branch in her hand, and drawing something on the ground. This strange action made Li somewhat puzzled. He opened his mouth and said, "Xiao Huan, what are you doing?" The servant girl stopped what she was doing and raised her head, saying, "I'm drawing." Painting? Li looked over and vaguely recognized two fat ducks on the ground in front of Xiao Huan. He couldn't help but feel even more confused. "Why are you drawing ducks out of nowhere?" "Son-in-law, this is a mandarin duck." Li Yi's words caused the little servant girl's pretty face to turn red. It was not something that could be grasped in a short period of time. Simple painting was instead the most suitable. Li Yi's mind moved. Books related to simple painting immediately flew out from the bookshelf. They turned into pieces of information and entered his mind. Inside the room, Xiao Huan stood beside the table grinding ink. Li Yi fixed the Kongming lantern on the table. A picture had already formed in his mind. Li Yi's pen was in Shaokai, so his handwriting was thin and suitable for drawing simple strokes. Xiao Huan ground the ink, while standing on her tiptoes to watch the fine lines form under the pen of the son-in-law. In a short while, a woman dressed in a palace dress appeared. Behind her, colorful ribbons fluttered. It was as if she was in the clouds. Very quickly, a man dressed in coarse cloth appeared in front of the woman. With just a few strokes, it formed an endless galaxy that separated the two. Countless birds flew from afar and gathered at the feet of the two. They formed an arch bridge that spanned across the two sides and connected the two together. Meeting on the Magpie Bridge, Xiao Huan stopped grinding the ink. Her crystal-like eyes widened. She could not imagine that without using any colors, the son-in-law only used these simple lines to form such a vivid and lifelike scene of the cowherd and weaver girl meeting on the Magpie Bridge. It was the first time the little servant girl saw a simple painting. Her little heart clearly suffered a great shock. Originally, she only wanted to draw two mandarin ducks. But what Li Yi drew really shocked the little girl. Chapter 18. The difficulty of simple strokes was the composition, which was exactly what Li Yi did not have to worry about. He only needed to copy the picture in his mind. It was easy to find similar materials in the simple strokes tutorials he had just absorbed. As a plagiarist, Li Yi did not need to put much thought into it. His hands were as smooth as flowing water, and it did not take long for a complete simple stroke drawing to be completed. The servant girl held her sky lamp and looked at it again and again. She could not bear to look away. When she looked up at Li Yi again, her beautiful big eyes began to twinkle like stars. "All right, go and do your own things." Li Yi waved his hand at Xiao Huan, then walked out of the door lazily. He sat down on his small stool, leaned his back against the wall, and enjoyed his sunny afternoon. After absorbing so many things at once, his head was a little swollen, and he needed time to digest it. Xiao Huan happily held the sky lamp that Li Yi had drawn for her, and walked out of the door. She heard a familiar voice calling her from not far away. She turned her head, and saw that in the open space in front of her, a small platform had been built. The platform was not finished yet, and a few young men were busy there. This was the Qiao Qiao building that was built every year on the Chinese Valentine's Day. In the past, it was the men in the village who helped build it. The person who called her just now was a familiar sister. Although Xiao Huan was a servant girl, she had grown up in the Lu family. She was even younger than Lu Rui, so the two sisters usually did not treat her as a servant. In the village, there were people who cared about the friendship of the former chief, and had always been close to the direct line of descent. Xiao Huan was closer to the women of the same age in the families of these people. "Is the sky lamp finished? Do you need my help?" A girl with an oval face, who looked 2 years older than Xiao Huan, walked over and asked with a smile when she saw the sky lamp in Xiao Huan's hand. If it was in the past, Xiao Huan would have agreed without hesitation. For someone who could draw a mandarin duck, it took a lot of courage to take out her sky lamp. But today, The son-in-law had already drawn a beautiful pattern on her sky lamp, so she naturally did not need anyone's help. Xiao Huan was about to speak when a mocking voice suddenly came from the side. Hey, isn't this Xiao Huan? Have you finished drawing the sky prayer lantern? An average-looking girl with a sharp nose and extremely thin lips appeared in their line of sight. A few other smiling girls followed behind her as they walked towards them. Seeing this group of people, Xiao Huan's pretty face changed, and the oval-faced girl slightly frowned. Xiao Huan, let's go. Before Xiao Huan could speak, the oval-faced girl stepped forward and grabbed her hand, wanting to leave. What? You don't dare to take it out because it's too ugly? The woman said sarcastically. Lu Mei, don't go too far. The oval-faced girl turned around and looked at her coldly. They had never been on good terms with the direct descendants. Although the fights between the women were not that intense, there were often small conflicts like this. She was very clear about Xiao Huan's painting level. If they saw it, they would be ridiculed again. Needless to say, it must be because it's too ugly to take it out. With Xiao Huan's standard, even my drawing with my feet is better than hers. It doesn't matter if your drawing is ugly. Take it out and let us have a look. Maybe we can give you some pointers. How petty. The people around the woman looked at Xiao Huan with disdain and spoke up for her. What do you want to see? At this moment, a lazy voice suddenly came from behind them. Hearing this familiar voice, the expressions of the women who had been mocking them immediately changed. They turned around and saw a young girl dressed in white. Her arms were crossed in front of her chest as she looked at them coldly. 2nd Mississippi, Rui. Xiao Huan and the oval-faced girl were overjoyed and quickly walked over. Did they bully you again? Lu Rui looked at the women in front of her and asked. When her gaze swept across them, the expressions of a few of them immediately changed. It was obvious that they were afraid of Lu Rui. They want to see my sky prayer lantern. With Lu Rui's support, Xiao Huan was no longer afraid. In fact, she had planned to take out the painting of her son-in-law to scare them. At this moment, when she opened the bamboo stick, the simple lines formed a complicated painting. A new painting method that had never appeared in this world appeared before everyone's eyes. This, although it was different from the traditional paintings they had seen before, no one, including the thin-lipped woman, could tell what was wrong with the painting that was formed by simple lines. In fact, when they saw this painting for the first time, there was nothing but shock in their hearts. Besides Xiao Huan, the oval-faced girl also had a look of disbelief on her face. Even Lu Rui could not help but reveal a look of admiration when she saw this simple painting of a magpie meeting on the bridge. Xiao Huan held the sky prayer lantern proudly, very satisfied with their performance. Who asked you to laugh at me? Great. Now you've been frightened by my son-in-law. The sun today was exceptionally comfortable. Like a lazy cat, Li squinted his eyes and continued to enjoy his sunbath. Suddenly, the warm sunlight was blocked. Li felt his vision go black. He opened his eyes abruptly and saw the figure standing in front of him, looking down at him. His body trembled, and he almost fell off the small stool. Until now, he still had a conditioned fear of this witch's sister-in-law, who had kidnapped him up the mountain. What's the matter? After a moment, Li came back to his senses. Thinking that things were different now, he moved the small stool to the side so that she wouldn't block his sun and said lazily, I'm sorry, but I'm sorry. Looking at Li Yi's lazy look, Lu Rui could not associate him with the image of a scholar in her heart. Sometimes, she would wonder why she had tied this guy up in the first place. Apart from his appearance, he looked like a scholar who did not do proper work and did nothing. He was either staring at second aunt's chickens or working in the kitchen all day long. How could he look like a scholar? However, thinking that she had a favor to ask, Lu Rui hid all these emotions in her heart. She handed a sky prayer lantern to Li Yi and said, Help me draw a picture on the sky prayer lantern. It's exactly the same as Xiao Huan's. Li Yi was stunned when he heard this, but he quickly understood that Xiao Huan must have taken his sky prayer lantern out to show off. He glanced at Lu Rui and said lightly, I'll be honest with you. 1 picture for 10 copper coins. Li Yi had yet to settle the score with her for kidnapping him up the mountain. He had been thinking about this matter for a long time. Finally he got the chance. If he helped her draw it without hesitation, where would his dignity as a man go? What did you say just now? Lu Rui's eyes narrowed slightly. She touched the hilt of her sword at her waist and asked. Seeing her action, Li Yi's eyelids twitched. He immediately stood up and took the sky prayer lantern from her phone. He said seriously, I'm just joking. We're a family. Talking about money will hurt our relationship. By the way, other than what I said just now, do you have any other requests? Chapter 19. Do you know what you did wrong? Seeing Xiao Huan standing there with her head down, Li Yi pretended to be angry and said, originally, he just drew a painting for the little maid on a whim. After she showed it off, Lu Rui also asked him to draw the same one. It was fine to draw, but why didn't he pay for it? Even brothers would settle accounts clearly, not to mention a sister-in-law. What if all the girls in the village came to ask him to draw? Although it wouldn't take a long time, Li Yi always felt uncomfortable if he didn't pay for the painting. The people in Willow Leaf Village were not particular about making people work without paying. The little maid looked down at her toes and rubbed the corner of her clothes with her hands. She blushed and didn't say anything. She would only do this when she made a mistake. After a moment he heard a soft voice. Young master, I know I was wrong. Li Yi raised his eyebrows and looked at her. Okay, then tell me what you did wrong? The little maid thought for a while before she raised her head and said weakly, I shouldn't show off your painting. Although she lowered her head to admit her mistake, the little maid didn't feel nervous at all. After getting along with him for so long, she already knew that the young master wasn't someone who would get angry easily. He was also very good to her, even better than Miss and Second Mississippi. The only time she was scared was when she cut her hand while helping the young master cut vegetables. Blood flowed out, and she wanted to grab a handful of soil from the ground to sprinkle it on the wound. But the young master lost his temper with her. However, didn't the people in the stockade do this when they accidentally cut their hand or something else? She only remembered that at that time, she stood there feeling wronged and wanted to cry. Later, the young master dragged her to clean the wound and asked for medicine from Mississippi. Later, he even boiled a ball of gauze in a pot and used a pair of scissors to cut a strip for her. Every time she thought of these things, the little maid felt warm in her heart. Although she didn't know why the young master did that, she knew it was for her own good. The young master was a scholar and knew a lot. He couldn't be wrong. Li Yi wasn't really angry. Seeing the servant girl standing there with her head lowered, admitting her mistake, he waved his hand and said, Go. Just be careful in the future. He did not know what Lu Rui was usually busy with, and could only be seen at mealtimes. As for Lu Rui, Li Yi felt that it was better not to see her. In this small courtyard, there were only Li Yi and Li Yi. Towards this little servant girl, Li Yi was even more familiar with her than his wife in name, and naturally would not blame her for this small matter. Understood, young master. The little girl answered softly. When she walked out of the door, Lu Rui happened to come in with a pile of things in his arms. Li Yi watched as she walked up to him and put the things in her hands on the table in front of him. Draw the same painting on these sky prayer lanterns. Looking at the thick stack of sky prayer lanterns in front of him, Li Yi's face gradually darkened. Did he really think he was a free worker? Pa! Another crisp sound. Lu Rui threw a bag on the table and said lightly, 10 copper coins for each painting, not a single coin less. Li Yi was stunned for a moment, and his eyebrows gradually relaxed. Deal. After staying in the Willow Leaf Village for so long, he finally met someone who paid attention. Wouldn't it be better if he did this earlier? Lu Rui couldn't stand his face the most. After a cold snort, she turned around and walked out. You are really greedy. It's just a painting, and you actually want 30 copper coins. You might as well rob someone. So what if it's 30 copper coins? Didn't you still pay? You still have the face to talk about me. You paid faster than me. Under the Qiao Qiao building that was about to be built, several women, who were directly related to the Lu family, were waiting there. Their expressions were not very good, as if someone had robbed them of their 30 copper coins. For these unmarried women, The Qiao Qiao festival was probably the most important festival of the year. They would release sky prayer lanterns on the night of Chinese Valentine's Day and make a wish at the same time, hoping to find a Rui husband in the coming year. For women in this era, this was directly related to the happiness of the rest of their lives. Therefore, even if it was a very small matter, they didn't want to be inferior to others. Xiao Huan and Lu Rui's sky prayer lanterns had a painting of Magpie Bridge meeting, which was obviously more beautiful than theirs and more in line with the theme of Chinese Valentine's Day. In this way, they were already at a disadvantage before they could even make a wish. What if Jinu liked Lu Rui's painting more? Then wouldn't it be none of their business? Women were very scary when they were superstitious. Moreover, these women weren't educated in atheism like Li Yi. If they weren't superstitious, what else could they believe in? In fact, Li Yi was also beginning to doubt the authenticity of atheism. If something like transmigration could happen, who knew if there were ghosts and gods in this world? Putting superstition aside, everyone had the desire to compare. Since others already had it, even if they couldn't surpass them, they should at least be on par with them. Although they didn't see eye to eye with Lu Rui and those close to the direct line of descent, they didn't have any deep hatred. They were willing to put down their pride and beg her. He never expected that although Lu Rui had agreed to it, she would ask for 30 copper coins per painting. She rejected any bargaining. They clearly saw that Lu Rui didn't accept money from those close to the direct line of descent. Although they felt it was unfair, 30 copper coins wasn't a lot. Moreover, they were asking for help, so they paid honestly. Seeing Lu Rui walking over from afar, the women hurriedly went over to inquire. At this time tomorrow, all of you wait here. I'll send the paintings over. After getting the answer they wanted from Lu Rui, the women then left in satisfaction. Putting aside their grudges with Lu Rui, they actually liked the paintings very much. Spending 30 copper coins, for it wasn't something unacceptable. After the crowd left, Lu Rui took out her pouch from her sleeve and weighed it in her hand. The corners of her mouth curled into a smile. At this moment, when she thought about Li Yi's cheeky face, she actually didn't feel that he was so detestable anymore. At the same time, Li Yi had just finished counting the copper coins in the cloth pouch. 13 paintings and only 128 copper coins. What a profiteer. 2 copper coins less than me. Li Yi put all the copper coins back into the pouch unhappily, but very quickly he smiled again. Weighing the weight, the smile on his face became even wider. No matter what, this was his first pot of gold in this world. Although it wasn't a lot, it was a good sign. Putting down the money pouch, he shouted towards the door. Xiao Huan, come in and grind the ink. The servant girl outside the door responded. Not long after, a petite figure hurriedly ran in. Chapter 20. The women in the village had been preparing for many days, and it was finally Chinese Valentine's Day. As soon as Li walked out of the door, he saw a high platform not far away. It was called the Qiqiao building by Xiao Huan and the others. The 4 corners of the platform were tied with ribbons, and the atmosphere was very festive. On the platform were fried fruits, melons, and some simple dishes. Li Yi saw that Xiao Huan had taken things like needles and thread, brushes, and inkstones from home. He guessed that they would be used for tonight's activity. They really attached great importance to Chinese Valentine's Day. The snacks on the platform might not be eaten even during the Chinese New Year. It should be known that the average living standard of the Willow Leaf village was not well off. Except for the family of the Lu family, which was slightly better, the others could barely get enough food and clothing. Because of Chinese Valentine's Day, Li Yi could find an excuse to give the naughty children a few days off. Most of the naughty children who were greedy for fruits, melons, and other snacks wandered around the Qiqiao building. They wanted to climb up and eat some, but when they approached the building, they were driven away by their sisters or the girls who decorated the building. Li Yi saw from afar that Lu Xiaohu was holding a stick and waving it vigorously. It was quite imposing, and he received countless envious looks from the naughty children around him. Most of the Lu family practiced martial arts. No matter men or women, they all had some kung fu. Putting aside Lu Rui and her sister for the moment, After witnessing his wife smash a solid wooden table, and his sister-in-law chop a tree trunk as thick as an arm with a sword, Li Yi's voice became much softer at home. Of course, he only saw them by chance. He didn't have the chance to see them fight with others. However, Li Yi estimated that even 10 of him would not be a match for any one of them. As he learned more about this world, Li Yi began to realize that things like Wulin or Jianghu really existed here. Although he was not sure if there were fierce people who could fight against hundreds of enemies and capture the enemy from thousands of men and horses like in wuxia novels, the individual strength of the people who practiced martial arts was far beyond Li Yi's imagination. In short, this world was very dangerous. He had to be careful when he went out. Li Yi felt that it was better to stay in the village. Lu Xiaohu was the leader of the children in the stronghold. He was the leader of the naughty children. He had been practicing martial arts with the adults since he was young, so his body was very strong. Li Yi stood at the side and watched with interest. "Hello, mister." Suddenly, a certain naughty child saw Li Yi behind him. After his body shook, he immediately bowed and called out respectfully. Only then did the naughty brats turn around. When they saw their teacher standing behind them, they all bowed in greeting, as if they had suddenly become obedient children. Lu Xiaohu also dropped the stick in his hand. Because he had just exercised, his face was a little flushed. He was slightly panting, but the expression on his face was very respectful. Among all the naughty children, the one who loved listening to Li Yi's stories the most was him. Although he was usually very naughty, in front of Li Yi, he would immediately become an obedient child. Currently in the stronghold, no one could compare to Li Yi in terms of who was the most popular among the naughty children. Where else could they find a good teacher who wouldn't make them memorize those messy things, who would tell them stories, and who would often go on holidays? The naughty children felt that the current teacher was many times better than the old man from before. Li Yi nodded at the naughty children, then waved his hand and said, "Go and play." Seeing that the naughty children had dispersed, and just as he was about to go forward to take a look, he suddenly heard a cold snort. "What teacher? He's just someone to hold down the stronghold." The voice was a little familiar. It sounded like the kind of person who said that the grapes were sour because they couldn't eat them, or like a peach that they had been drooling over for a long time being plucked by someone else. Li Yi turned around and saw a young man standing not far behind him, looking at him with a rather unfriendly gaze. The moment he saw him, Li Yi remembered. Wasn't this the guy who had barged into the house with his second aunt, Madame Wu, and was scared away by Lu Rui in the end? The way this guy looked at him was like a dog that had seen a bone, which made Li Yi very unhappy. "Sai Wuing, don't say that. He's a scholar after all." Just as the young man finished speaking, someone beside him spoke up. "Scholar my ass, he's just someone to hold down the stronghold." Another person said. There were a few people beside the young man, and after a few words they burst into laughter. Since ancient times, literature and martial arts had been opposed. Scholars, on the other hand, practiced martial arts. They thought that they were a bunch of boorish people with well-developed limbs but simple brains, and that they only knew how to show off their bravery. Similarly, those who practiced martial arts also looked down on scholars. They felt that they only knew how to talk and had no real ability. Even if they could recite a few poems and draw a few pictures, they would still be trash with only 5 points of combat power. What's more, the direct descendants never had a good impression of the direct descendants. Right now, Li Yi was labeled as a direct descendant. "What are you doing here?" A clear voice came from the side, and a few women walked down the stairs. When they saw Li Yi, a smile immediately appeared on their faces. The woman in the lead walked over, curtsied and said, "Brother-in-law, you came at the right time. I just happen to have a matter that I need brother-in-law's help with." The woman in front of him was called Lu Yu. Her father was an old subordinate of the previous stronghold master, and she was about the same age as Lu Rui. Usually, they called each other sisters, but after getting to know each other, she called Li Yi brother-in-law. As for this woman, Li Yi had seen her before, but he didn't know her name, nor did he greet her. Later on, he didn't know why, but when they met again, her attitude suddenly became much warmer. It wasn't just her, Even the girls beside her would smile and greet her when they saw her. Out of curiosity, Li asked Xiao Huan, and found out that they all liked his paintings on the sky lanterns. The reason was that he sold his paintings to the direct descendants for 30 copper coins each, but he didn't charge them a single coin. The girls all remembered his kindness in their hearts. When Xiao Huan said this, Li Yi's expression was dumbfounded, and he couldn't hear the rest of what she said. He only knew that Rui gave him 10 copper coins for each painting, and sold it for 30 copper coins. At that moment, Li Yi felt that he was an idiot. When the young man and the others saw that the girls treated him like air, but greeted Li Yi with smiles, they were very unhappy. The young man called Wu Ying coldly snorted and said, "What can a scholar do? If Miss Lu Yu has anything, just tell us." Although the two of them belonged to different camps, the young man with the surname Wu naturally wouldn't treat a beauty like he treated Li Yi. He patted his chest and said enthusiastically. Lu Yu turned around and looked at him with a strange expression. She said, "Today is Qixi, so I'll have to trouble you to compose a suitable Qixi poem." Qixi poem. When the young man with the surname Wu heard this, his face froze, and then turned green and white. It was a wonderful scene. Compose a poem? He couldn't even read a word. How could he know how to compose a poem? If he knew that Lu Yu was looking for someone to compose a Qixi poem, he wouldn't have acted so pretentiously. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.